and just run out to do it.
But
You know what?
my
I
other
got it.
suspicion
Don't
Well,
worry
we don't
about
need
it.
it till this
Well, you
afternoon.
may not have
Okay.
just knowing your jobs, my suspicion is that you actually might know a lot of these activities. It just was not presented. And even again, I go back to some of the actual, like the gender box activity. I don't know if you've done that, but I did that.
Check.
You kind of seen the actual activity. You might actually know 75% of it and not even realize that you actually have been witness to all.
I think this thing is working. I hope it's working.
I haven't heard anything more, but I am generally the last to know, so. I accept that.
You can use the eye, participate with the eye.
No, and to be honest, even last year, I definitely did it, but I was never getting. So I don't understand their system of communication. That's what I would say.
I think that two people are left. The last year was kind of passed on to somebody.
Yeah, so some people are.
Okay, we'll get started here. So good morning. Thank you for your patience. You know, part of this 2 days is really capturing some of your thoughts and thinking. And we want to do that now, and we want to do it tomorrow, or later on, I should say. It's, we might be sending out this follow-up survey online today once you leave here. So, but anyway, welcome. On behalf of Kent, I'd like to welcome all of you to Grandview University. Kent, thanks for helping host this. Becca, thanks for helping organize today's and tomorrow's work. Thank you for taking time out of your week to be here with us today and tomorrow. My name is Alan. If I haven't met you already, my name is Alan Heisterkamp, and I direct the Center for Vascular Engineering at the University of Northern Iowa, and have the utmost privilege of working with colleagues here in this room on your various institutions and universities and colleges, and also in the community. So I value that. I appreciate those connections, relationships, and really help to take and foster all of those, cultivate all of those relationships, and just expand and grow this thing called primary prevention, and how we can become better at engaging others in this conversation and facilitate thinking around that. We're in good company today. As you know, across the country, 8,000 Starbucks are closed, and they are training on how to really address the issue of racism. They're not going to solve it, I'm sure, in one day, but it has garnered a lot of publicity. It has been in the news. It has been the president, the CEO of Starbucks, has been on several news shows and have talked about this, and there have been comments criticizing what had happened or what took place with the two African American men who came in and by the 911 call, et cetera, et cetera. And this morning, if you listen to NPR, they were talking about this very thing. They were playing lots of different 911 calls that some folks were calling into the police as it has to do with their anxiousness and their feelings of unsureness and not being safe. So again, there's a lot of work to do here, not just with gender-based violence and preventing it, but also in terms of race and sexism, etc. So thank you for engaging in this conversation that we're going to have today and tomorrow. Bring your whole self to the conversation, and we will help guide and facilitate the discussions today and tomorrow, but we'll really be keyed in and interested in your thoughts along the way. So thank you for being here. You're going to meet more intimately the other members of today's and tomorrow's training team Daryl Ford, Portland, Maine is here. Daryl is a national MVP trainer, facilitator, works closely with Dr. Katz and embedding MVP in a variety of institutions, higher ed, military, etc. So you'll hear more from Daryl here this morning. My colleague at Northern Iowa, Michael Fleming, Dr. Fleming, you'll meet him later this afternoon, talking about some of our work around the evaluation and assessment. We're curious to know and to find out A, what you've been doing, but also B, what we're going to do together collectively to really get a handle on what's the impact that MVP and the model itself is having on our campuses and more broadly in our community. So how can we measure that? What's that look like and sound like? And then most of you know Tess Cody. Tess has been a longtime colleague and currently with Access as his director. And some of you have worked directly with Tess or maybe indirectly. I have appreciated being able to co-facilitate trainings with Tess around the state, be it high school trainings, be it college campuses. You know, Tess brings a wealth of information and experience and knowledge to this field of prevention in the real practical sense, but also in terms of I would say therapeutic, theoretical, and but also how do you get things done? Tess is amazing in those areas. So I'll be anxious to have you work with Tess here later this afternoon as we talk about some things related to implementation and training and recruitment and all those things. The kind of overview of the day, this is the 10,000-foot view, if you will, of what we want to accomplish here in the next 48 hours. And that thing is out of time. I sit here talking. So there are some basic themes and goals that many of you have gone through. How many of you have been through the 2-day train the trainer? Okay. All right, thank you. Touched on in terms of that training, some of the underpinnings and some foundational stuff related to MVP goals and things. There's some more information that we'll be anxious to share with you, but again, just understanding what is the foundation of MVP, and some of that was shared in Dr. Katz's article that I think hopefully most of you got from Becca. Hope you got a chance to peruse that and look at that. It really is a nice overview, cursory view of some of the backstory, the backdrop of MVP, and more importantly, how it is fitting into and providing some really robust discussions around gender-based violence prevention on college campuses and workplace. Really, and I feel very privileged and honored to have Daryl here to really not just talk about, but model some of the pedagogy and some of the teaching and the processes of delivering activities that are found in our trainer's guide or MVP, and being able to share his experiences, share his work, his delivery. But really, we want you to be your authentic self when it comes to training and facilitating, like you already do, but become better at that. I'll talk more in detail here shortly about what it means to be proud, what it means to be an Iowa master trainer, and then how we can expand this work across campus. We have the center of Northern Iowa has an ambitious goal of being in every secondary school and promoting MVP or otherwise this work across all of our institutions of higher education. So we'll talk to you more about how I'm looking forward to working with you at that capacity. Secondly, on day 2, we'll be introducing to you, Daryl will be introducing to you some new scenarios, some new materials, whether you create some yourself here later this afternoon, but a chance to really learn from each other. And so that will be somewhat consistent with the 2-day trainer that you experienced, but it will be new stuff. And so a chance for all of us to learn and to grow in new ways there. So thank you in advance. All right, here's what I'd like you to do. If you would please look around. Would you find a face that's not familiar to you? So find a new face. Would you ask each other or those 4 points? Well, those 5 points. I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, and then I'm going to call you back, right?
Perfect.
You're in the back corner.
As an advocate. I enjoy it. Yeah, but I don't spend there enough time. Yeah. Success is something that we have to the majority of the kids are well, I'm not. I traveled all the schools for the 3 years. And I'm working I do. I work for Mercy College, technically, but I travel to all 4 schools. Well, so I actually have a housing background. I work in college housing for director. Yeah, so they hired me and then they did. Yeah, my boss didn't hire me. So anyway, I want to say I want to hire it's just, you know, like substance abuse. I worked on television yeah, I do. I love it. So anyways, I'm interested today. I'm just learning all after there's so much information. I feel like this has to be more it's going to help me the other part is that my undergrad is in people. So I really think maybe you know, putting all the pieces together, you know, you gotta stay in touch with it, otherwise you become one of those people. Right.
I agree.
Right.
So this is gonna pick up.
What I'd like to do now is
At
to,
so we've been well recorded.
somewhat succinctly, but also to be aware of the time frame this morning, get into the flow of the training, but who's in the room, who's here? So if someone would start us off, and would you share with us as much as you recall or remember from your brief conversation that you had this morning with this new person? Introduce that person to us, and we'll just do this popcorn style. So someone will start and kick us off. And we're gonna deaden the screen for a moment, and then Michael's gonna help take this timer off on my slides. Name, position, org, why the training, passionate about, and a successful summer will be what. So if you don't remember all those things, don't feel bad. I forget. Lisa.
She is from Grandview here. She is, works in residence hall, right? And why the training is, often she has students come to her in her position. She wants to make sure she understands how all of this works, and so she can follow the chain of command, excuse me. She's passionate about service. She's done some unique things with her students here, alternative spring break and other things like that, taking them on a few trips. And her successful summer will be since leaving in Las Vegas. So, it will happen. It will happen.
And this is Debbie. She works at DMAC. She oversees Title IX at all campuses and judicial, yes, as well. She's interested in this training because she just wants to get more of the knowledge on and creating a process, because right now she's actually working on her dissertation and she feels very comfortable with the law, but she wants to find better ways to implement it across campus at the process level. And she's passionate about helping. That's really just helping and making things better and resolving issues before they really become issues. And a successful summer for her will be getting a good chunk of her dissertation done.
Thank you.
This is Casey, and I am very happy that Casey is here. She's actually a student on my semester, and I think it's super cool that someone as young as her that's a student at Drake University is interested in making campus a safer place. So kudos to her for being here. I think the rest of us are here for our job. So she's going to be a sophomore at Drake right now. She's interning at the Iowa Cubs this afternoon. She actually has to leave early because she works for Starbucks and they wouldn't accept this as an alternative for her training this afternoon. She didn't say that. I said, why don't you just come up and front where you're at? This has got a substitute.
We could break it down.
We'll be talking to Starbucks. They'll be adopting what they teach here, right? Starbucks next year.
So
Daryl, can you write her a note?
she is interested in sports culture specifically, which is what Dr. Bishop said she did the bystander. The training, that was really interesting to talk to women about coming here. She would like to open a nonprofit that works with athletes and gender violence. And very interesting to talk about what she's passionate about. And her successful summer, she said, would be when she has a little bit of time to relax and she is interning this summer. So.
Thank you.
So this is Mindy. She kind of does like counseling and education at the DMAC Ankeny campus. I can't remember why you said the training.
I work with a lot of our sexual assault individuals, and also I'm the LGBTQ expert.
And she's really passionate about the students just from talking to her. You can tell she really cares about her position and what she does. And then her successful summer would have DMAC realize they need her more than just during the campus months. So I love the position.
I would rather not, either during the summer or
Oh,
I have two small children.
You're negotiating for less time, right?
I love my children. I'd like to spend more time.
Thank you.
I can go.
Thanks.
So Leah is behind me. She is from Drake and does case management and works in disability, right? And she is here because she has done the training with a trainer, and I think sort of my recollection is a combo of why and passion, sort of being passionate about the impact doing training on students and kind of seeing them experience that shift, being able to take some of that stuff on. And a successful summer would be spending time outside in the sunshine, getting a little bit of time off now that things have slowed down.
And this is Ellie, and you are the director of counseling at Simpson. By the training, I know that you said you work with advise women to student organizations and work with sexual assault. Passionate about just conversations, I guess, around kind of gender violence and preventing that. And then a successful summer would also be getting outside and having some time with your son.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna turn around. So, everybody. This is Jennifer. Jennifer's a faculty at Simpson College. So she's in the theater arts. And kind of cool, at least for me, one of the things that they do over there, she does it's a May term, and does a class with students called Agents of Change, or helping with Agents of Change, that they kind of help put on, they think about the MVP process they learn themselves, so they do some programming at their freshman orientation to help students kind of understand just violence prevention, bystander intervention, and whatnot. So she's really, it's kind of like the feel with how that goes. We didn't really
I
get
know,
to.
we didn't do that.
We didn't talk about successful summers, but we're going to. Thank you.
So this is Kent, and Kent is here at Grandview and is in charge of counseling and leadership. Yes, and we didn't do this very well, but we did talk about how he is interested in trying to integrate more things related to this kind of work in terms of the first year students and how to better help the students here on campus. And we did kind of share a lot about how my class works, and I think it made me want to have more of a conversation about what you do at Grandview and what we do at Simpson. So I hope he has a successful summer, but I'm not sure what it is.
I'll go, but I already failed the quiz. Because I remember all the other stuff, and I totally forgot your name.
You know what's really funny? I forgot your name
We were just so focused on everything else.
We did a quick name introduction.
So this is,
I'm Emily.
Emily. And she's actually here from Illinois. She's at several schools in that area and doing this way. You're part-time, right? So kind of part of your is the sexual assault advocacy of some of the college students, and then she does the MVP. And so we talked a lot, I do a lot of coordinating at Simpson for kind of things. So we talked about how we get more male students involved and how we didn't get to all that other stuff either. We really kind of go into how we can help each other figure some things out with pre-flight athletics.
You're networking already.
We can, yeah, but then forgot each other.
So this is
Kate.
I was gonna say Carrie, I was close. Kate is a faculty member in the education department at Simpson, and she started working with Sarah, their student advocacy group, right? And got involved in things that way, and then by way of changes through her position, is kind of in charge of involving MVP in their curriculum. Is that what we say?
We're working on that.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
And working on getting athletes involved, and figuring out, like she said, we just kind of went on our own rants about where we want to make improvements and what we want to build on, and what each of us is doing. So we did follow. Thank you. Now we know each other are the word of that.
Great, thank you.
I spoke with Monique. She's here at Mercy College, and she is director of student success. And we actually skipped the why training question. I don't know why it is that. But she's very passionate about working with students and would like to get more involved with working with students. She's kind of been a little bit removed from that with her current position. And a successful summer for her looks like we echoed some of the same stuff. She wants summer off. But she said just gearing up and getting ready for the fall school year.
And this is Sarah. Sarah is working for, I'm going to say, a nonprofit agency in the Quad Cities, and she does things with sexual violence and goes into different schools in the area and works with the training with MVP and what else? am I missing what you actually do? No? Okay. She is passionate about getting the word out about it. Summer. I feel this morning, I don't remember. Yes, the air conditioning thing, I do remember that. So we also spoke with Kenlyn. Yes, Kenlyn. Yep. And she works here at Grandview, and Sarah.
Is she counseling and direct student leadership? Yes. Student leadership.
In Kenlyn's position, we talked about successful summer, what it looks like. I was saying that like more time. And Kenlyn was telling her she had more time. She likes to hike and she's passionate about the outdoors, wanting to merge the two things together in terms of some of the training. So that was our conversation in a nutshell.
I like how you co-facilitated that.
This is Pamela.
Maybe there's some threes, because I can't add to look at you.
Lindsay and Kennedy and
Yeah, we
Pam.
all spoke together.
Yeah.
She is a counselor at the DMAC Urban campus. She's interested in this, she thinks it's important for students and the community. And mentioned that DMAC Urban has the largest campus population of ESL students. So passionate about or need for like knowing cultural differences and working with organizations that work with other cultures.
No, we didn't get there yet. We're still pondering that.
Yeah. We can also this is Lindsay. I work with her at Mercy College. She is the counselor. She's one of the main people who does a lot of the bystander trainings for our students. She's passionate about her kids. Is that what you said?
This is Kennedy. She works at Mercy College. She's the student health nurse. But a major role of her position is to be involved with our grant. And so she does a lot of the prevention education piece of it. So she has been trained as a bystander. She has been a major part of creating bystander training for our population, plus online students. We're in the process of creating an online bystander program. I'm guessing her interest is just to learn a little bit more about, I remember a successful summer will occur when she can gain more interest in people presenting at our college.
I'll go. This is Robbie Tyerson. He came in late because I had him working. He works in the residence life at Grandview University. He's interested in this training because just has a thirst for knowledge like no other. He's passionate about the Minnesota Timberwolves, and a successful summer is leaving work on time, as he always stays to play. So that's Robbie. This is Joe. He's from Mercy College. He's the director of financial aid, right? Like what? Financial aid? What's I doing here? Anyways, Mercy College uses all their people to their maximum ability. So he helps do some of the training and the orientation sessions there. So he's been doing that for around a few years now and wants to learn more about how he can be a better presenter and feel more comfortable in having those conversations. He's passionate about his new daughter that was just born this past April. So a successful summer is getting his work done. He's spending more time with her.
This is Adam. He's the director of residence life here. So as you can imagine, a lot of this training is right up his alley. Been at Grandview close to 4 years now. 3.
I said it.
You did. Thank you for taking the call. Successful summer would be obviously taking the conversation that we have here over the next 2 days and really putting it into practice, going beyond just the initial training with RAs and having this conversation about this come to life. in the residence hall.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yes, this is Rebecca. She's an OVW grant coordinator. She's housed out in Mercy College. And she's, by doing these trainings, she learns a lot more about what community is doing and the needs of the community and trying to stay on top of things so that she can better administer the grant.
We didn't, I mean, I don't know that we got to a whole lot because we ran out of time. So this is Tammy.
Tammy.
Did I make that
Yep.
up? No? Okay, good.
Tammy. Yep.
Tammy. Yep. And she is an advocate at Polk County Crisis and Advocacy. She's been doing work around the area for about 20 years. And she has been a major role of SART, did you say?
Yeah.
Okay. And building that program. So that's pretty cool. She's passionate about her horses. She wished she could spend a little more time with them. She's got quarter horses. And she said a successful summer will occur when she doesn't get any calls from daycare. They switch daycares, and so you just never know what's going to happen. You just never know.
Through the day.
Yeah. Just got to get through it.
Thank you. Eric, I know you had.
Yeah, I was way on the other side. I'm tucked away here in the corner, so I kind of went over there and spoke with Daryl. He was introduced by Alan to us, so it was kind of awkward because I approached him and he was focused on his notes. So I kind of was just approaching him and introducing him. Right. Yeah, sorry, I'll stand up. So I was explaining what I was doing with regards to what Alan had asked us to do. Since he was already introduced to us, I kind of Googled him, so thank God for Google.
Was it like stalker behavior?
Yeah, very stalker behavior. But I wanted to at least, say something about him that probably wasn't disclosed to us or said to us. Yeah, but he has a BA in political science, and one thing that I found out was that he was an advisor to the governor of Maine a few years ago for quite a number of years as well, doing prevention work with domestic violence and sexual assault and stuff like that. So, yeah. And that's what you're not saying it, and I apologize, but yeah, that was very stalkerish.
We have a whole grant.
We have a scenario on that later.
Yes. Yeah.
So Eric's on the internet. So a little bit about Eric. I don't need time to Google Eric.
There probably isn't much about me at Google. So
Eric, real quickly, tell us about yourself, why you're here.
So my name's Eric, obviously, Alanis, and I'm a victim advocate for Polk County Crisis and Advocacy Services. The reason I'm here at the training, I've been doing the MVP training welcome week at Drake University once in a while, and I say once in a while because we do it for incoming freshmen, so we don't get the opportunity to do it on a regular basis. But I am doing a young men's group at Hoover. We started also at Scagel, which wasn't as successful, but the group that I'm doing at Hoover, I'm using a curriculum from Paul Kibble and Alan Creighton, which is Young Men's Work, which talks about power and control, the gender boxes, how to be allies towards men, towards women, just different things. So I'm trying to see how I can incorporate MVP to them after using that curriculum with them to kind of give them a basis of power and control with regards to systemic oppression and things like that, and just kind of giving them a foundation and an idea of what a lot of those things are that affect them in their community, and then how they can use bystander intervention moving forward. So that's kind of the goal for the summer for me.
That's so important. Thank you.
Yeah.
I've forgotten about your work in the high schools. They're so fortunate to have you. How many other advocates, community advocates, and prevention specialists are there with us here? Emily and Sarah. Yeah. So forth. Thank you for your partnership with the campuses and also with the broader community as well. Yes, all right. Thank you for that sharing with each other. So, as you will see throughout today and tomorrow, that there are some staples. That there are some non-negotiables with MVP in terms of when trainings do occur.
again, being mindful of the type of training that it is. Is it a 60-minute, 90-minute classroom presentation? Is it a 3-hour training? Is it a day-long training? Or is it a Tuesday training? Any of those. What we're going to talk about today is real explicitly is what kind of defines an MVP training and your role currently, but also in the future, your role as a facilitator of any one of those different types of trainings. What are the non-negotiables? What are the things that become a staple and a consistent part of the model? Because that will help us together be better at measuring impact. So I'm really looking forward to this afternoon's conversation about how we can do that. We'll share with you how we're doing it right now. Michael and I, for example, are helping to evaluate and assess almost 30 high schools in Iowa who are at various stages of MVP implementation. And what does that mean for them? We want to give them feedback so that they can present it to their staff, their boards of education, their parents, to the mentors themselves, the students who are actually kind of shouldering the work in the high schools, so it continues to motivate them. But on a college campus, we'll share with you how we are monitoring and evaluating our presentations that are embedded into the curriculum. So working with College of Education at Northern Iowa and how we get in front of our human relations students. But just 2 weeks ago, one of the students said, "Don't wait till we're ready to do student teaching. We should talk about this stuff earlier." And so learning from what students are wanting and needing, and I'm anxious to hear also that you hear about some of the cool stuff happening at Illinois and in Davenport at August 10 in Illinois, but also in Iowa.
St. Ambrose.
St. Ambrose. Can we pull that out of my head? Been there several times. Thank you. So embedding into the curriculum, really institutionalizing. What does this mean? So again, these activities are not new to you. But we will be talking about and going deeper into some of the theory and the pedagogy behind those that I would hope that you would internalize and just put your own facilitation skills on booster mode as it relates to helping teach others how to teach this stuff. So we'll come back to these in the area. Real quickly before I turn over to Daryl here, when you think about this is relatively new. There was a previous master trainer that took place, I would say 4 or 5 years ago, test of Northern Iowa. This is a little bit different than what that training was actually about. This training here today and tomorrow is it has several different modes to it. It's very practical in terms of the nuts and bolts of MVP, those non-negotiables and tables, but also we'll spend more time with the pedagogy and the teaching of it today and tomorrow. And kind of a capstone with you, kind of helping share with each other some of your own facilitation style and doing yourself. But being mindful of how we want to be consistent as much as possible. Being a master trainer for Iowa, really one of the key things is helping support the center. We are fortunate to have partnered with Jackson Katz from the day that the center started. And in fact, we were launched in 2011. Jackson's been an ongoing advisor for the center. He's written about it, he's mentioned it, the work at the center, but our work at the center is really to become a much more robust distribution or expanded conversations and trainings. And that's exactly what we hope comes out of this particular training here today, is to start to see yourselves as some of those, and as trainers embedded into the community and how we can grow and branch out from there. Conducting trainers on your campus. Some of you do those trainings or do trainings on campus right now. Again, and there's different types of training we'll talk about: 2-day, the 1-day, the 90-minute session, etc. Each of those, depending on the audience, have some specific outcomes. So we'll talk about that. Partnering, I mentioned this earlier, but we do want to become much more intentional with regards to measuring the impact. It can be challenging to do that just on your own campus, right? Let alone trying to create an Iowa impact. I don't have my prop with me. Okay. So last year, the Center of Northern Iowa convened about 18 professionals across the state, from higher ed, from secondary schools, public health, other organizations, advocates in the domestic violence, sexual assault arena. And we met for a year, and we wanted to know, we wanted to do kind of a needs assessment, an overall arching view of what's happening in Iowa around gender-based violence prevention and bullying prevention. We kind of put those two together. But looking at kind of through a preschool, pre-K through 16, grade 16 lens, you know, young elementary, middle, high school, higher education. And so this document, which I have some extra copies of that I can show you later, you can see at break. But in there, the center is trying to be very communicative to our stakeholders, legislators, school, college, university, administration staff, secondary school staff, parents, community leaders who work in prevention. What was happening in Iowa, and how can we be better at prevention? And so that particular document has been shared with many colleagues around the state. But part of this training today is in response to this. What can you do to expand the prevention efforts on our campuses, in our secondary schools, and the community? And then what roles and responsibilities do we have for ourselves and in our position, organization, but then moving out? How do we share that with others? We'll end up tomorrow talking about some of the outreach. Some of you, when you do, what I've always appreciated about how we've done our trainings in Iowa, that if St. Ambrose is going to host, or Alexander is going to host the MVP training, one of the first things we talk about is who else can you invite from around the community? What other schools, what other agencies could be invited to participate in that training, or at Simpson or wherever. We're always on the lookout to see who can we identify as a leader in that particular organization and invite them to be a part of this 2-day training. We've always done that, and that there have been so many times that other trainings have occurred because one person was invited, but someone from a nearby school or university was invited to participate in the trainer that someone was hosting. So I've always appreciated and have valued that part of how we work together as a state to be invitational to others, to expose others to this thinking around prevention. Because when that happens, people start writing dissertations about it, or they start figuring out how do you embed this more deeply into a curriculum, you know, college ed, for example. How do you embed it into a high school? How do you speak it into a boys group at Hoover High School when there's an in? And there's a person that can be a champion to help navigate that stuff. That's how this is all going to work as a defined network. So again, thinking about our territory being certainly our immediate campuses, our immediate home base, if you will, but starting to reach out, you know, within the state of Iowa. Jackson has, Daryl's one of them. He has a group of national facilitators. Start thinking of yourselves as Iowa facilitators, you know, and what we can do here in Iowa to raise the bar around prevention and become much more intentional about that. So appreciate it as well. Real quickly, last thing I'll say here before Daryl is the binders that we put together are really a resource. It's not something that we're going to go through from page 1 to page 2, but I do want to highlight a bit more content real quickly. And in a very rough organization color code, but there is some information about themes, goals. There's also an executive summary that was written as an evaluation of MVP at California State University, Long Beach. And that executive summary kind of talks about the research that was done on campus. You'll also see later on some of the training schedule for that particular summary. But the next section there has to do with some of the activities, some of the non-negotiables, some of the MVP staples, if you will, around different types of activities embedded in training that we'll talk about on today. And you'll notice that resource strictly will not be, it's consistent with and similar to most of you who have gone through a two-day training would have received one of these bigger manuals. There's much more information in here than is presented in those, but it does kind of succinctly describe some of those really touchstone activities that make MVP, right? There's also a section there on some scenarios, some that will be new to you. And I'm anxious to get your feedback and to have you kind of help practice and facilitate those for all of us so we can expand our knowledge and background about that. There's also some examples in there of some trainers, training schedules, also some very short, quick evaluation forms that we've used. And then in the very, very, very back, you'll notice some information about high schools. And we'll talk about more of that tomorrow. But just suffice it to say that if we want our campuses to be safe and respectful for all of our students, I think one of our goals and strategies in higher ed should be to reaching out to our secondary school partners and helping those students get that information before they step foot on our campuses. That will just increase the level of safety and preventative response before they even come to our campuses. And so I think that's an important strategy for us to consider in higher education. All right. Well, I'm just a few minutes beyond what I wanted to speak, but again, thank you for being here. There in the back there's some line paper. There's some free to take notes, test notes. Feel free to write on those, write directly on the sheets themselves. We're waiting way in the back. We'll find some line paper. Y'all have a pen or pencil. There's extra ones over here. But with that, I think I'll introduce Daryl Fort. I had the privilege of meeting Daryl several years ago. I'm watching him facilitate when I was just beginning to think about what does this training look like in my own work, and I just really appreciated learning from Daryl and colleague of his in this bigger, broader MVP family. So he's a man in high demand and works with colleagues coast to coast and beyond, not just with MVP, but with other programs as well. He spends a lot of time on campuses, extensive background in working with the military. Well, and so I appreciate being able to have Daryl with us today. So I'm not sure what the weather was like in Maine, pulling the name about Daryl, but it doesn't get any better here in Iowa. Welcome.
Y'all don't like this.
No. Oh, we just love it.
Not June,
Yeah.
we expected, or May, we expected in August.
Yeah.
No, I hear you.
So anyway, help me welcome Daryl.
So I'm gonna put one on the head. How that's gonna work. Okay. Before I get into anything else, somebody read that out loud for us.
Education consists mainly of what we unlearn. Mark.
Are you folks familiar with this? With him? What do you think he's getting at here?
We always think we know something until somebody reveals to us a different understanding.
Sorry. You said no.
These notions that we, I don't know, like our biases that we know just from our lives growing up or people we've been around or environment, unlearning, recognizing those and unlearning them. Speaking more on that, like, I think it kind of speaks to getting off our own tracks and seeing outside our own perspective. Because I think education really elaborates on what we know, but it also highlights what we don't know and like highlights this curiosity or this need to learn more.
I actually share this quote with my education students at primary teach elementary. And we talk about the first kindergartner that came to class and shouted the F word in the middle of my class. And so the discussion is.
Fakasha?
Yes. But the question was, should we punish that 5-year-old for saying the F word when that's all they know and they don't know any different, that maybe it's not appropriate? And so we talk a lot about this idea of coming with an understanding of our environment and where we're at, and how do we help curb that thinking without basically throwing the parents under the bus for teaching them the F word.
So some of you already sort of touched on this a little bit, I think, implicitly. But what do you think this quote has to do with the work that we're here to do today, that you do, many of you on daily?
I think for me though, it has to be about being able to step outside of your comfort box, to be able to learn something different about each individual in each moment, that our biases are always working against what we're doing consistently with prevention work. So.
Thank
you.
I mean, kind of similar to that, I think, like the unlearning, we have all these kind of notions of what is acceptable, and I may have missed someone saying this before, just like stepped on some suggestion, so I apologize if I'm repeating. We have all these notions of what is socially acceptable, and especially like the gender norms that have been set in our society. You know, I give an example. I used to teach women's studies about, you know, 2 little kids on the playground. A little boy falls down, and the teacher's response is something along the lines of, "Oh, wipe it up. You'll be okay. Off you go play." A little girl falls down. "Oh my gosh, are you okay? Are you okay?" How we treat them. So this is socialized at a very young age, and so a lot of what, at least in the article I read, we're talking about now is kind of unlearning some of those stereotypes and some of those societal expectations that we have, and making these big societal changes of how we look at things.
I do an exercise where we talk about the influences of your life. And you're in the center of that. So whether you're from the Midwest or your work ethic or sports or anything like that, and how that creates who you are. And some of that's very good, but it also creates a lens. Unless you're aware of your lens, you have to take off the lens when you are meeting people. So, and make sure that you're seeing things for how they really are versus all that stuff that you have brought with you since the day you were born and created.
What about for you here? Are there any implications for your time that we're going to spend together here over the next 2 days in this quote? Yes.
I know for me, coming in as a student, like there's a lot of ideas about, in the campus discussions, like there's a lot of ideas about how sexual violence advocacy and prevention and education should work on the student side. And like learning that that might not always work, or learning that there are different definitions people have of sexual violence, and kind of unlearning that your definition is the only definition out there, or your way of addressing the problem is not the only way to address it.
I just think we're, people with a lot of background already kind of in this arena to some degree. And so you kind of hope you bring that background, but at the same time, you want to maybe take a hand off of it too, and not feel like you know everything. Your mind open to just one perspective. You bring your expertise, and you have to let go of it to see you're to learn.
Smile. Something striking your.
I appreciate your presentation style, right? Like you're a massive dude, soft as whisper, right? Like I'm thinking about this, but like as I used to come and watch presentations, I watch you presenting, and it's just very appreciative of your style and conversation that you lead, and just how you're presenting yourself. That's what I was. I just didn't agree with what people were saying. I mean, what do you
I as I was reading the article that Alan had sent out to us, I used to be a professor of psychology, and so when I think of like bystander, I think of bystander intervention and peace enemies and all, like, and so that article really touched on the difference between bystander intervention and bystander approach. And so for me, like, that's something I'm like, okay, I need to unlearn how, and not necessarily unlearn how I currently think, because that's still maybe applicable to psychology, but be able to separate those things and kind of unlearn that that's the only thing that bystander means, and there's a bigger scope of what that encompasses with the leadership and all of those types of things. And so even just from reading the article, there's been some like that, I have to rethink some of this and work how this
Yeah, thank you for that. So, I mean, in some of those comments are going, or a springboard to sort of where it is that we're going, like immediately from here, but throughout the next couple of days. But one of the things that always strikes me about this quote for me, and oftentimes doing it in a setting like this around this material, is its implication for, and a sort of invitation for the humility involved in lifelong learning. Like, this is an invitation to, as you said, take your hand off. I don't know, did anybody else envision a wheel that your hand was on? But the ability to sort of be open to what new experiences are, but also an invitation to empathy as well. And was one of the two that sort of suggested that piece around, well, hey, what was the example of the student, the F word, right? So there's this opportunity to sort of be open to where people are as well, and invite empathy in this space in a way that empathy is useful and supportive and serves all of us, which doesn't exclude the challenge, right? Because I feel like there's a challenge in this group personally as well. And that's certainly sort of part of what it is that we were asking you to sort of bring here today. I just want to talk a little bit about, and some of these we've already touched on, just around expectations for the next couple of days. To be clear a little bit about what it is that we're doing. Number one, and I vacillated a little bit back and forth around before we started about what I was going to say about this, but I think it's important, given what potentially you are going to be doing or asked to do, to put together what may be a training for other people to do this, is understand we're really putting 3 days into 2, right? I wouldn't often advise any facilitator to sort of talk through the timing or any anxieties about time like thing, but I think it's important to understand that we're making choices around sort of priorities in terms of what's important for us to cover over these next couple of days, making choices about how blown out some of what it is that we're going to discuss around some of the components of the curriculum and some other elements of what it means to be a trainer, what it means to be doing this work. So just some of you may feel some of that a little bit, right? The job of us is for none of this to ever feel rushed, but you may feel at certain places like, wow, that could have breathed just a little bit longer, and just understand that part of the reason why you may feel that way is it's just a function of what it is that we need to do over the period of time. And quite frankly, it's for better or for worse. In some respects, it's a lesson in terms of resources. I mean, I know it's not a lesson anybody here doesn't already probably know in terms of what you're afforded in terms of time or resources to do any of this work. And again, this isn't news to anybody here that we're still struggling as a culture to prioritize what it is we're doing here to the point where we're actually committing the time and the space to engage this work. Right? So just that piece of it off the top. But some of this also reiterates a little bit of what Alan was talking about. So MVP, I'm going to say this throughout the session, is a leadership program that focuses on the issue of what we'll refer to as gender violence prevention. Right? MVP models a way to have these conversations. And some of it's in the homework. Well, a lot of what the writing was in the homework sort of leans into this. is the effectiveness of how MVP as a program has the ability, we've had success at inviting people into this discussion and thinking about this work and these issues and challenging themselves that here, prior to, within the movement, we had a hard time getting access to certain groups of people, right? So I say that to say, again, from an expectations perspective, thinking about this training as modeling MVP as a way to have these conversations with folks, and quite specifically, folks who may come into the room without a hell of a lot of interest in what it is that we're here to discuss, right? But leave the space feeling like, that was time well spent, right? So thinking about it in those terms. The other is, we're gonna spend some time covering this. I'm gonna do some modeling, and some of the modeling is gonna talk in and out of we're in this, but also we're gonna take a step out and just talk about a little bit of the big picture, well, what's going on here, right? So we're gonna be back and forth into that, and all of that hopefully is in the service of, as Alan suggested, taking a deeper dive into the core themes and elements of what this curriculum is. Does that make sense? Because I think it meshes very well with a lot of what you talked about in terms of when I asked, what's this quote have to do with sort of how we may invite ourselves to show up or be present in this space? Really give you some backdrop to that. But we want to support you in what all of that is for you. And in a minute, I want to hear just a little bit about what some of your experiences have been already. Actually, but before we do that, actually two things before we do that. Number one, think a little bit more about me, just briefly a little bit more about me. You've already heard that you heard my name, Daryl Ford, and you can Google that. So funny how this has worked, right? How many of y'all remember when that couldn't possibly be a thing, where your life was on the World Wide Web? And that's the way I think about it. When I think about online, I think I use those terms, the World Wide Web. Talk about feelings of vulnerability. But in any respect, my name is Daryl Ford. I'm actually originally from New Haven, Connecticut. Is anybody here from Connecticut? What did you say? New Haven. Yeah. Anybody here from the East Coast at all?
Massachusetts.
Mass? Whereabouts?
Wakefield, so now it's on Boston.
Okay.
I've been in New York.
Yeah.
I just spent the last 13 years in Michigan. I worked at Quinnipiac University.
Oh, all right.
I
I only
lived
did it for a second.
Okay.
Just for a second, yeah. But so you heard, I currently live in Portland. I mean, that's still where all my people are at. But I currently live in Portland, Maine. I've been in Portland for longer than I've lived anywhere else, right? I've pretty much most of my adult life, so certainly consider it home. From a background perspective, I actually went to college there as well. I went to the University of Maine. My academic background was in political science and public policy. I had an athletic background as well, which is part of my sort of origins in MVP as a program, is steeped in the sports culture. I was a football player there. All of this longer ago than I'm going to admit to anybody here in this room. Right now, I don't often admit it to myself, although it seems like a lifetime ago. And in the context of a college campus and college students, it was a lifetime ago, right? I was lucky enough to walk out of school into a gig in public policy, right? It's what I wanted to do, and I was able to do it. I was sort of had a privileged path, if you will, in terms of doing that. I worked first in the state legislature for a couple of years as a committee staffer, then became a partisan staffer and connected with one of the state senators that I worked for and with, and ran for Congress, won a seat in Congress, and I was an advisor to him for 4 terms in Congress. We came back, won the governorship, and I was a senior policy advisor to him for his first term as a governor. It was during that last part of Congress and in the beginning, that period of time was when I came in contact with this program, and I was already doing work on the community level around with a specific multiple programs, and one of them was specifically focused on the healthy development of young men and boys, right? And their mentors, particularly adult male mentors around them, around sort of healthy development. Sometimes I talked about it as the sort of the value added to the Big Brothers, Big Sisters model. It's like, so in addition to, we found somebody to show up, we're interested in how do you show up? What's the character that we're trying to build or develop? The assets that we're trying to nurture and develop in people. And so what I was doing on the community level, what I was doing on the professional level in Congress and the executive of the state around some of these issues, among some others, really sort of meshed with MVP. And I had a lot of opportunities. I sort of, in many respects, ascended to where there's very few places to go up other than put my name on a ballot or something like that. But it wasn't a few years after doing this work that I had sort of a moment, sort of epiphany moment. It was one of those places where I was in. I did a lot of work, and in some ways I cut my teeth in this work, working with the military, specifically Marine Corps. I'm sitting in a session like this with a group of senior enlisted Marines, a co-facilitator who's sitting and managing the conversation more or less, and I'm just sort of listening to them. At this point in time, we're in the early days of the governorship. Everything is sipping water from a fire hose in terms of what we're doing. And I'm taking time off to be in California, from Maine, to be sort of doing this. And so all of those implications aside, I'm sitting and I got my head down sort of, and just kind of listening, and it just washed over me that I was at work. This is working. It's like I went to school to do what it was that I was doing, and I love what I was doing, but at times it's just a grind, right? And both physically, but also on my soul, it was a grind, right? But this felt completely different, and I realized, again, it was a privilege that not everybody gets to experience, to be in a space, right, that's a professional space where you're working that just doesn't feel like that. It's like, shh, quiet as kept. If you give me the time, I just show up here and do this, because this works. And so I knew probably then and there that I was going to make the transition. You know, some of you, I share that for a number of reasons, but one of them has to do with your part of your perspective in terms of who shows up for this. We'll get a chance to sort of think about this perhaps going forward in terms of how you're thinking about recruiting, like who you're approaching and how you're approaching, but there is still a thing, and certainly it was almost 20 years ago when I started doing this, where a big part of my introduction was about, well, why are you doing this? Like, what are you doing here? And the first guess was often, well, I'm on some sort of work release program. I'm here, I call it charge, because you're doing it, and you're getting like time off or something, you're gonna get your probation knocked down, so you talk to other guys about, you know, what you did type of thing. Like these are the assumptions, the expectations in terms of who's supposed to be doing this versus not, and it's something, again, that's still this part of the mix that we need to sort of consider in terms of what the dynamic is involved in some of the challenges and the opportunities around doing this work together. So with that, so the other thing that happens is as you move through a training, a curriculum around time, you gotta make choices about time. Time goes around. So I'm gonna skip around a little bit here in the beginning. And so I wanna go here. So we all facilitate MVP sessions, know that this is a part of what it is we're gonna do, but we're gonna walk through this here now together as well. Because I'm interested in where you're coming from, but also as a way of sort of looking at a version of facilitating this exercise. So I want to ask you, what are characteristics for you? I'll leave this out. That's not a 6, that's a B. It's already started. I've written 2 words, and already it's coming out. What are characteristics of good leadership? What do leaders do? How do leaders act? In order to be a leader, I represent what with my behavior?
Active listening.
So, what is an important characteristic of good leadership for you?
Nothing is worse than talking to somebody and the only thing they're doing in their head is thinking of what they're gonna say next.
Okay. When you say nothing is worse than that, how do you feel when somebody's doing that to you?
Had that conversation with a 13-year-old this morning.
Who was checking who on this?
But I think it's, it's important in a leadership role. I think what's so hard in this work that we do is students come in to us and they're afraid we're not going to hear where they're coming from, right? They know the right answers for the agree, answer, disagree. So it's important to hear where they're coming from and kind of understand that.
Yeah, sure.
I think going along with that kind of plays on that is being present. When you're a leader, you're present, you know what's going on, you are tuned in, you're listening, but at the same time you are active and engaged in what's happening. Present time, you're present. A lot of times students will come in and you'll be doing things. I often remind myself, stop, turn around, look at them, and listen to what they're saying. I think that goes along that. You're active, present with them.
I think I'm hearing that too, open. Open to what others have to say, open to feedback, other types of things. Yeah.
Can I write that?
You can.
Does that fit with?
Not work.
Okay.
I think like authenticity and that what you're talking about like in your work or when you're in your leadership role, and that is who you are and what you do outside of that as well.
So,
Like you
is
live
this
out.
a way of
Yeah, you live
being
out.
genuine?
Yeah, you live out what you say is important, or the values that you're saying are important.
Okay. So is that a little bit of off the
Yeah,
top, set an example
Yeah.
type of thing?
Yeah.
Which is a little more specific, okay. We count that one down. How many other people were thought of this when they think about this? That's where you were going?
I was actually, well, it's kind of related, I was thinking inspirational.
Okay.
So I think not only setting an example, but motivating or inspiring other people to look at themselves and possibly change.
I think knowing your audience and respecting your audience. So knowing the people you're working with and really respecting the people you're working with. Your audience can shift in a leadership situation. It's not always the same.
Okay. So what's important about this speech for you?
So the respect,
Yeah.
that we're all on equal footing, that the people in the room with you, whatever that room might be, have value and you respect their opinions, you don't come at it from a condescending point of view. I think the old model of leadership of I know everything, you don't know anything, I'm going to impart it. I think you have to respect the people around you and where they are.
But why? If I know everything, then why shouldn't I impart it?
Because I don't think we know everything. I don't think a leader does know everything. I think that goes back to the notion of listening. You have to, I don't think you can work in a community if you don't respect the people you're working with. I don't know everything.
And I think that also, sorry.
I had humbly confident.
Okay. Can you describe a little bit what you mean by that?
I don't think we would ever follow somebody who feels is floundering. But I don't want to follow somebody that's so arrogant either. So I want someone who could take charge, but going off what my colleagues were just saying, that is not respectful, that perhaps they don't know everything, and that there's more than one way to do something.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so I mean, obviously we've not exhausted the list of leadership characteristics, right? And we sort of keep going here. But there are a couple here, 3 that I sort of wrote down, put in parentheses, signal that they came, at least initially for me, but I just want to check in and see if this fits. Is accountability a characteristic of good leadership, or why do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, people have to trust, right? They have to know that you're gonna show up and be dependable. You know, there's a confidence in that person, that they're gonna be there. Not only will they hold you accountable, but they'll be accountable to their own.
Okay, good, thank you. How about courageous? Is having courage, demonstrating courage, characteristic of good leadership?
I think that really plays into like being able to go somewhere that's kind of scary or like that's unfamiliar, and have those difficult discussions and have that productive discomfort kind of feel.
I like that word, productive discomfort.
Yeah, catching phrases out here. Anything else in terms of courageous? Does this fit? Do other people think I'm just checking in for this is strong here? Okay. Oh. Showing vulnerability, the ability to be vulnerable. Is that a characteristic of good leadership? Is belong? Why do you think so?
I don't think you can do any of the other qualities or have really embody any of the other qualities without being vulnerable and being authentic to yourself. And with authenticity comes vulnerability, because then you're opening yourself to get hurt.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
I think
What do people think?
when you model that, it also elicits people to do that in return too. And that's what, and that's what like helps conversation happen, going to difficult places with people.
Interesting. This came up implicitly too a little bit, didn't it?
I was gonna say it engenders trust. And there's accountability trust that Adam was talking about, that you're dependable, but there's also that sense of the authenticity or vulnerability that engenders trust as well.
Okay.
And it ties into that unlearning idea that we were talking about. We're not coming into these conversations to give all the knowledge to the people in these conversations. We're starting the conversation for everybody to be involved in the discussion with the idea that we can learn something in that. We can have viewpoints changed and people can change within that. So allowing yourself to be that authentic self, that vulnerable self, to say, this is something different than I had intended, or a different idea than I was coming in with, and that's okay.
Yeah. Why don't we start here? It's sort of a double-ended question, isn't it? Why don't we start with this particular exercise? What's the first thing that comes to mind for you? I'm thinking, this is gender violence prevention curriculum. The first thing, or one of the first things you ask about is.
Yeah, I guess the first thing I go back to is the quote that you put up there, and some of these things we think we might have a good handle on as a leader. But we may have to unlearn some things to move forward. And so being vulnerable to that, I guess that's just tying the two together is what that means to me. And hopefully we walk away with a better understanding of that obviously this is what people need in a leader in order to model that to them. And so what are we doing? What kind of work are we doing on ourselves to get to a point where we can truly lead and be that example for the others?
All right. Interesting. Thank you. I wrote in the corner you saw earlier, internalize versus externalize here in the corner, and partially a reference to that, just a sort of a reminder around that's connected to the quote, it's connected to everything. And for me, it's connected to accountability, right? Personally, like I don't ever stand up in front of a group or in the midst of a group around and trying to encourage or challenge people to be outside of their comfort zones in some way and then not have any of that expectation for myself, right? Or any of the number of different factors that are around sort of being open and willing to sort of challenge yourself and continue to learn. And so that's one of the ways and one of the phrases sometimes we use to reference that idea. It's like, well, you know, with them, when I get in the room with them, like sort of they're this way, it's a way of sort of keeping some of that in check. But why else do you think, or let me ask this in another way, sort of why do we do this? How do you, as you sit here going through this exercise, many of you, if not all of you, having facilitated it before, what are some of the things you articulate in terms of the sort of the why? As you debrief, if we go from here, we're generating this list, and so now let's talk about it. So now we'll refer to that as sort of the debrief part of the exercise. What are some of the things that you highlight when you're doing this, for those of you that have? Yes.
So I think some of this is about how we are in this space too, and talking, so doing this with other people, talking with them about like taking these things into the conversation we're having today. And similarly, as I look at this, I think about not only how are we teaching others to be leaders, and not only how are we as leaders in those facilitated discussions, but how are we in this space in the next 2 days too.
Okay, thanks.
One thing we try to highlight is that you don't have to be in a leadership role to have these qualities. Like, you could be a student doing these things. So.
Did you shake it off?
I was burping. But excuse me. Yeah.
Sure. Good. Anybody else? In terms of, yeah.
I talk about it in the idea of leaders move towards change. This conversation is talking about changing our culture and changing the conversations around sex, around relationships, around disagreeing. And leaders help push towards that change. Doesn't matter who it is, it can be anybody, but identifying that everybody has those characteristics of a good leader can develop them. And it moves everybody towards change, and to me, that's the goal.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So that's a key piece for us right off the top. It's like the implications of what it is that you both have described is that I take away from this is that it invites everybody into the conversation. Because sometimes the rhetorical question oftentimes is, who can do this? Well, first of all, the first question is this easy? Is it easy to live this down? To be honest, right? It's kind of like if it was easy, more people or everybody be doing it type of thing. But who can? Do you have to be the provost? You got to be president of student life. You got to be the athletic director. You got to be tenured professor, congressperson, right? It's more or less rhetorical.
right? But one of the things that can be important to point out is that oftentimes in conversations about leadership, the discussion often narrows. It becomes myopic as it relates to titular or formal leadership. Like, who's got the title? And that's certainly an important element of it. If you've got the title, if that's part of your responsibility professionally in some way, or in some ways even informally, well, then this is applying to you. But it also applies to other folks as well. Because when you think about this, and if you probably think about the list that you've generated in your time as facilitating this particular exercise, more often than not, these characteristics are filled basically with values, like principles about how it is that I want to live. And to that extent, the invitation is there, and the challenge and the opportunity is there for all of us to sort of step into that. So it brings everybody into the conversation in terms of what it means to leader. If by virtue of the things that I do and the way that I walk, my talk, my life, through my life, then I'm exhibiting leadership at different times, it's an invitation. Does that make sense? So it literally from the very beginning, sort of signaling to folks, well, wait a minute. So this is a framework to talk about these issues that already I have a potential stake in. Like already now, this is about, wait a minute, there are implications here for me, right? And more than likely in a way that I came into the room thinking, as opposed to with gender violence, domestic violence, sexual assault doesn't have anything to do with me. Almost all of us, right, would cop to, well, wait a minute, when I think about what these things represent, I feel like you may have said, this is who it is that I want to be. And so if we're talking about from the beginning to frame these issues from the perspective of, well, who do you want to be? What do you think is important in who it is that you want to be? Right, is the first step in that sort of invitation. Does that make sense? Sometimes, and we'll always, at least I do, this is not a formal piece of this necessarily, it's not going to be in the material, but I'm always framing these two elements, beginning with courage, but also around vulnerability. It's like, why are those things, checking in that fits for people and sort of why they're important. And because at the end of the day, some of y'all highlighted this, for many folks, this is all good. My leadership is set. I'm good to go. Up until the point where you're asking me to say something or do something that's going to elicit blowback from members of my crew, from my peers, from my colleagues, from people that are watching. The second I feel like, no, I'm going to catch some blowback, well, then I'm going to step back from that. Then wait, I need to rethink all of this stuff, right? And it's kind of that go along to get along mentality. And sometimes, again, the framing is, so what does it mean to sort of go along to get along? To not really risk sticking your head up or your neck out, not risk being the subject of ridicule or scrutiny, not risk potentially losing status with my girls or with the fellas or that type of thing. I'm just going to go along to get along. But is there a lot of go along to get along up here? You look at these characteristics. Are these consistent with no risk, keeping my head down, going along to get along? Yeah, and again, if the answer seems somewhat rhetorical that it's not, well, that's part of the point. This is pretty much antithetical to that. And this is the list that comes from you all as a group, and then beyond the group. So in that respect, you've already defined, in some ways, the person you want to be or what you admire as somebody that's willing to take this challenge around this line and say, yeah.
What is that?
Anti-high five moments. So go along to get along means I'm good to go. As long as I'm getting high fives and kudos and attaboys from people, then I'm good with my leadership. But the second, I'm more likely to get an F you than a thank you for what it is that I'm saying, what it is that I'm doing, then yeah, there's that threshold. And so that becomes part of the challenge of, all right, this is a framework for leadership that we're talking about. This is the foundation we're gonna stand on for the rest of this conversation. Is the invitation to think about what leadership and the person I wanna be as being somebody who may say the thing that's what people don't wanna hear me say, or do the thing that nobody wants to see me do, because I may understand that it's in our best interest. Does that make sense? Let me ask it another way. Who do we generally trust more in our lives with things that are important to us? Truly important. Do we trust the people, well, which category person? The go along to get along person? Or the person that's willing to tell us that we don't want to hear? Or do what it is that we don't want them to do in the moment because they feel like it's in our best interest? Which category do people generally actually trust more? Which is?
The person who's gonna tell me, who's gonna speak the truth.
Yeah, I mean, and that's 99 to 100% of the time the answer. And so if that is a truth in terms of how it is that we experience sort of our lives outside of this space, again, that continues to define the sort of foundation that will stand on for the rest of this conversation. And it's whether it's the next 80 minutes or the next half day or the next day or the next 2 days. Yes, ma'am.
So I don't know if it's gonna be important or useful, but I'm putting this together so that courageous piece. And as I look at that list of the leadership qualities, it's about what we do or what we give to others and not what we are getting in return. And so it's that whole thing about, so how many of us want to be liked and want to be validated by other people, but that's not necessarily what comes from being willing to do the hard stuff and to say the hard stuff.
Well, this is so much I mean, I think about, tell me if this doesn't track with you, I think about and look at what's here, and so much of this is about service, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, when I think about serving other people, there's a different character than I want to do whatever I need to do to be liked by somebody, isn't it? Or is it? I'll ask you, is there a different character between I'm looking, right, to behave in a way that's in service of other people versus I'm looking for validation and approval from people? Is there a distinction there? Yeah, okay. Yes, ma'am.
This actually just love all this, and it's bringing up for me just some conversations lately about kind of two context pieces that have kind of intersected in my world, which of course we hear all this Me Too movement work, and also Drake made the news, right, about student activists naming names very publicly, and kind of within an advocate community of folks being like, this is good, important work to have done, and also I fear that it might accidentally turn off the tentative allies, you know, the folks who are kind of ready to step up to the plate, but we're like, I don't want any of that. And so this to me feels like, that conversation of how do you help guide people of like, this might be hard, we might be imperfect people, and yet it's still so important to engage in this kind of way versus I only want to engage if I am, you know, covered in Teflon and perfect. And so I am appreciating the conversation about courage and vulnerability in a more finesse way, especially given kind of where we are, I feel like, in history, where it's asking people to continue even through imperfection.
Yeah, thank you. And again, sort of thinking about this is where we're starting, sort of use that imagery and that idea very purposefully. But this is a foundation to stand. We're going to continue to sort of be able, as you know, there are elements of sort of unpacking some of the pieces about what makes this hard for people, but always from a perspective of sort of we're tethered to this now. This is sort of foundational. This is something that that can anchor where it is that we go from here on. And so the connection I want to make, then I want to come out of this and get some of your thoughts again in terms of what your experiences have been a little bit around facilitating this work. And so they're thinking about, okay, So what's, from an MVP perspective, how are we thinking about operationalizing this leadership that we're talking about? How are we making it work? And so that's where the bystander approach, right, as a philosophy sort of comes in. So how is it, I'll ask, based on the reading, how is it that we're defining bystander?
Please, anyone who can use those qualities to step into a harmful situation, even if it's not like overtly harmful or, even small level behaviors, anyone who can be a leader or step into something that's uncomfortable.
Okay.
And the reading emphasized that you don't even have to be there when a situation happens. You can still be a bystander with the aftermath of how everything happens. It's really anyone in the community that can be a bystander.
Okay. Anything else?
I'll just add that even in beforehand as well. So it's not there's a situation occurring or a situation did occur, but that as far as being a leader in culture.
Yeah. And oftentimes I'll describe it quite simply, particularly amongst a peer group that's in a group together, is bystanders defines who it is that we are to each other. It literally just defines the fact that we're in relationship with each other on different levels, because I may be different a little bit from this group because you're coming from different agencies and organizations, but even some of you here have professional relationships, you have personal relationships, you spend time together on the job, in an office, spend time together on the road, spend social time together with families, you're in class, you're on team, you're in practice, you're working out, you're training together, right? It's like we are bystanders to each other, right? And along the continuum on different levels. And there are different, and we influence each other in that, right? Like who here has not had the experience of somebody who you're in a close relationship with, you may be working or class or working out, that somebody decides that they're going to get up and do the thing that you're supposed to be doing at a time where you just don't feel like it. It's like, I need a nap. I'm going to stay in bed. I'm going to stay home, right? I'm going to watch, I don't know, like I was trying to think of a reality show and I can't think of one. Whatever that is, right? I'm going to binge this. Netflix and pizza type of thing. Or whatever the narrative is telling you I don't want to do this. Who here has not had the experience of seeing or watching or having that other person say, hey, come on, let's do this. Or watching them do it and it motivated you to go get up and do it. Who has not had that experience? It's universal, practically, right? Any of us that have social interactions have had the experience of others influencing one another. And so that's the important element of what makes bystanders in our definition as bystanders to each other so important in terms of operationalizing leadership. And it comes down between the choice between being active versus passive / empowered, right? Excuse me, very active, empowered versus sort of passive. And the choices that we make, in times that may be tough, that feel like those anti-high five moments, to be one or the other. And it's important for us in this work to be able to recognize in some ways how baked in the passivity, the narratives around passivity are in the culture in different ways. And so much of what the curriculum is about is the opportunity to explore that stuff, right? But from the very beginning, the understanding is this is the challenge. This is a major challenge in the culture, right? And there are all sorts of elements of identity and positions and privilege and perspective that falls into this as well, in terms of how it is that we make that choice. And even understanding what this choice is. We're gonna get into that in a moment. Like, what does this actually mean? Like, are all challenges. But sometimes I'll ask the question, again, somewhat rhetorically, is, lest we think this is not true, go ahead and finish this sentence for me. Whether you believe it or not, finish this sentence for me. What happens in his house?
Stays in his house.
Yeah. What goes on in the neighbor's house 2 doors down is whose business? None of your business. Who said none of your business? None of your business. Right? It's like, whether or not that's what you believe, sort of inside, everybody knows how those lines end. And so from that perspective, what it demonstrates is that those ideas are alive and at work in the culture. Everybody knows how those rhymes go, whether you're pushing against it sort of as an individual or person or not. Yeah? Okay, so the thing that I want to do now is take just a couple minutes here. Actually, so here's what I want us to do. Oh, so actually, before we do that, the last piece. So this is an element of the reading, obviously, but it's important for us to reinforce because in some ways it continues to, even after it seems a generation of the proliferation of bystander, right? Violence prevention focused bystander programs sort of in the field that have proliferated, that are antiseptic to cultural factors that constitute the social justice framework of beginning with MVP, from the very beginning, taking on the issues of gender, identity, toxic masculinity in particular, right? Straight on. Not necessarily using jargon, in fact, quite specifically and intentionally moving away from jargon, the movement to describe this, but through the conversations and through the exercises and through the material, right? Unpacking or trying to unpack what it means, right? What our gender identities and our expectations around traditional and binary gender roles have to do with the decisions we make about how we show up for one another as bystanders, right? So it's an important element of that. And within that is the imperative, but then also the opportunity within, we can sort of explore more of this, I think, a little bit in terms of some of the examples that we'll go through the next day and a half, is the flexibility within MVP as a curriculum to sort of fold in elements of what these identities mean for us in any conversation, right? It's part of what's available, but it's also part of what can sometimes the challenge can be as sort of facilitating this work, is to be able to have these conversations in the way that MVP is sort of laying out how to have these conversations that are inviting and engaging from the beginning. So they use Esther Stoller, who's the head of Futures Without Violence, the term she coined, to invite rather than indict. Because inviting rather than indicting says nothing about abdicating the opportunity, the responsibility to challenge in the space. Those things are not mutually exclusive. Inviting rather than indicting in no way implies collusion or the need to be doing any of that in the space. And it's one of the things that MVP has been doing successfully, right, for a number of years. Does this part make sense? Actually, what I want to do is perhaps sort of springboard from there to this. So really these first three, because we talked a little bit about this last bullet, I just want to take some time, if you want to pair or threes, just have a brief conversation for a few minutes amongst yourselves about just a little bit about your experiences facilitating MVP training, specifically What are some of the things that worked? What are some of the challenges that you've encountered? Right? I don't want to sort of come out of it and just not, we don't have to be comprehensive about this, but just sort of surface a few ideas or experiences within that. But just go ahead and take a few minutes amongst yourselves to share around some of those. By the way, then we'll take a break. Then we'll take a break, by the way. We'll take a break. I was impressed with this one. Yeah, that would be the show. So there are One more minute or so. One more minute or so. Okay, folks. Can we, yes, you do. You're like, no, that was my issue with that.
Yeah, there we go. That's how we calm it down.
That's a skill.
So before we share out, just can you back up and just take a couple of housekeeping things that I neglected to say earlier. First of all, number one,
so it's another opportunity actually to back up a little bit. We didn't stop on it in relation to the slide, but just a couple of things in terms of expectations in the space for us, right? Again, internalizing versus externalizing is as much for us as it is for anybody else that we are within this program engaging in conversations, right, about dynamics and occurrences that touch us all, but all sort of in different ways, right? So this is the invitation and also the expectation set to take care of yourself in the space, right? Everything that we do here is voluntary, right? And so at any point you need to take a break or take a step out for whatever reasons in the direction of self-care, then again, the invitation and the expectation is go ahead and do that. There's not going to be any judgment about any of that from the front of the space. There shouldn't be from in the space as well. And sort of to that end, oftentimes what we'll do is just sort of list a resource number. I'm going to ask, some of y'all are actually in the space, potentially resources for others who may want to sort of talk or engage some outside either campus or community resource. Can I list a name or at least a number up here at the top, or a couple of numbers for folks that may want to?
What's Polk County's hotline?
Our general number is 286-3600. 286.
Is that the area code?
No, 515.
Sorry,
I'm sorry. Yeah, 515 area code.
Yep.
286-3600.
And that is for?
Polk County Crisis and Advocacy Services.
Okay.
Counselors here on this.
And so that is Kent.
And Kim.
Is that does everybody know what Kent and Kenlyn is? Is it KIN? KENLYN?
We're both counselors.
Oh, Kent, you're saying your name.
Kent and Kenlyn,
Is that like Madison Square Garden? Gotcha.
It's like TV card.
Yeah, brain schema, man, brain schema. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And so the last note that sort of relates to that is just to ask everybody to respect and agree to the norm that was shared in the space here. Stay in the space and respect people's willingness to be to share what it is that they feel like they can and want to share, and then we'll respect that and keep that within the space. Does that work, folks? Okay. Is there anything else that feels sort of jumped out, sort of burning around other normal expectations? Okay. So what about just take a couple minutes here to sort of reflect back a little bit about some of your conversations in the groups around just experiences, things that worked, things that felt like a challenge, or maybe a challenge over, maybe these things combined. So you found the challenge and you overcame the challenge.
I'll just add one thing. We were talking at Mercy College. We have what feels like a pretty built-in advantage, just in terms of audience and purpose, and that we're about 90% female. So it can be an easier conversation to have. You don't run into many people who are close-minded, and also we try and kind of have frame it in terms of their experience on campus as a student, of course, but also do our best to weave in that this is going to be an expectation of them in their future career as a healthcare professional. So we find that kind of creating that touch point that made it, obviously the foundation of MVP will always be the same in terms of the sexual violence, but just in terms of bystanders doing the right thing, thinking about what you might do when you find yourself in a situation that isn't comfortable or doesn't feel right, in a kind of a variety of contexts.
We talked a lot about like development, so what students are ready for. Because oftentimes at universities you have like a half an hour with a student group, that's all you get for the 4 years or something. So you try and kind of shove everything into half an hour. And developmentally they're not ready for that. And so it's kind of too much too soon mentality. And so we talked about how starting with the leadership components can really developmentally meet them where they're at versus like going to like shoving everything in.
So like 7.5 minutes per year.
I'm kind of in the process of this one, just thinking about it. We were talking a little bit about this. The one I'm thinking about is just sometimes how it's difficult to engage men or even college men as MVP trainers in the process. I've been thinking about how we have like an engaging men group that started in January, and we'll see kind of how they engage as MVP trainers maybe in the fall they want to, but so much of my time with them has been more around just kind of thinking about their identity and who they are. I think that's what I really appreciate about where you're going with this, because a lot of stuff thinking about identity and who we want to be in a relationship with each other. And I think that time investment and thinking about, again, the people they want to be in their identity, I think is going to be, I hope that invests them in wanting them to kind of transition more into actually doing this work in engagement, because sometimes it's hard to get men involved with the trainings. And so I'm curious to see if that's going to pay off.
So I think for us, I was gonna say,
Sorry.
We, I think, have had a fair amount of success in pairing with other constituencies on campus, I guess I would say, so pairing with street lights and athletics and certain classes or certain majors and those types of things. But one thing that I really found myself thinking about as we were doing this activity was, so this year we did all athletic teams for the first time, and we did them as teams. And I think it was a really interesting experience as a facilitator to do a team, because there was this mix of both bravery, but not, because there was this need to continue to act as a team and to not step out, as you were talking about. And so I really found myself resonating again with some of the ways that you were talking through the leadership activity and how that might help some of those conversations and some of those students who are invested in maintaining that team status and not rocking the boat too much as a result, with that mix of like, but we want to be brave in this space as individuals, and that might mean challenging your team at times, rather than being brave as a team together and needing to always be on the same page.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So one of the things that's intuitive that I'll just say is, right, and will be around sort of this approach, and there are other elements of that we'll go through about having this conversation, is how much of these values are already a part of those peer groups, right? So when you think about and talk about engaging some of those peer groups, again, some of this is really intuitive depending on who you are, right, and where you come from. I was raised in sports culture, right? So these things, they instantly connect, right? There's nothing antithetical about challenging one another. It's embedded. The example I gave around influence sort of begins there, because within certain peer groups, it's all about challenging one another. The difference is when it comes to this stuff that we're talking about, wow, what's it? All of a sudden this line, it's not even a line, it's a brick wall that comes up, right? And so if we exist in this space to support, but also challenge each other and push each other to be the best, right? And oftentimes it's in a box, to be in the best shape, to have the most mental toughness as it relates to physical pain, to be able to sort of overcome defeat, like all of these different values and pieces in certain peer cultures are already there, right? And so the reframe that we'll talk about comes back to, well, wait a minute, duty, honor, courage. Those Army Corps values. Wait a minute, so what is sexually harassing, assaulting, right, abusing somebody in your family, a fellow soldier, a fellow airman, teammate, a friend? What does any of that have to do with, then getting back to the Army example, duty, honor, courage, right? And so it's surfacing the tension between this, who it is that we want to be, that we're supposed to be, that's embedded there. Again, some of this is just very intuitive to folks within that group. And so it's one of the ways to sort of think about the sort of out, about strategizing, well, okay, so what makes sense? Who makes sense to be in front of this group, right, around this? That's still part of the calculations that can be important for us to make around this stuff, where it just becomes a, hey, well, we know this stuff, right? What's going on? Right? If this is how we were raised, why aren't we showing up like this? Right? If this is all the talk in every locker room I've ever been in, or in every barracks I've ever been in, or whatever the context is, then what's going on? Right? Let's talk about that as a springboard to inviting the conversation, but it's meeting them where it is that they are. around the conversation that's relevant. It's meeting relevancy with relevance. So what we want to talk about. Well, this is relevant to you. Well, we found a way to connect those things. Does that make sense? Okay, one more in terms of if you guys want to take a break.
Piggyback off Ellie, I feel like we have had some great success. I mean, we hit first year classes, athletics, Greek life. So we hit them several different times. We're still looking at different ways to do that more often. But a couple stumbling blocks we have with that too is I can't tell you the number of coaches that called and said, they already had this in their SC 101 class, so do they really need it again? Can we just sign off on them having it? And so they're still kind of missing the point a little bit, but I think after the training, they do better with that. And I mean, we struggle having enough presenters to cover all of that. So as much as we want to infuse it into so many different places, I'm so glad we have so many here to keep doing some of that.
I'm sorry, can we parking lot some of these pieces? Because I think these are all important, where there are actually direct answers to some of these, and then there's some others that we can workshop a little bit. But I think, yeah, no question. The first thing that came to mind when you said they do better after the training was, is that a coaching and staff session that you were talking about?
Yeah, we tried that.
We tried that. We've
Yeah.
run those before. Yeah.
Yeah.
The
So-
students actually do better with it, I think.
Well,
The coaches do, than the coaches do, but yeah.
So there's a way to thinking about that. I mean, there's a whole element of the curriculum that's specifically focused and tailored to, and there are ways to think about, okay, so, you know, I've got, this is the audience, like what's gonna work best for them sort of within this versus it's trying to square peg round hole a group of staff and administrators into the thing that you're doing with first year, second year, for example.
Did I
Okay,
capture a couple of those, the recruitment piece, the engagement lens piece, so anything else on the parking lot that we'll touch on?
I think we can,
I would add too, just for other people, we kind of try to keep like a housing place for all of the PowerPoint. So like, this is the first year we've hit all of the athletic departments. So we've kind of done a similar PowerPoint for the facilitators to go off of. But I also think that's helpful because we don't want to do the same thing. We don't want to have the same, does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like having materials if you're providing several different sessions, like you can have a general one. So I don't,
Yeah,
know
how
what
we
we're saying.
Sure.
In first year, this would be helpful in second year with athletics.
Okay, ready to take a little break?
Bathrooms are
man, good one.
down, bathrooms are down this hallway.
Okay, so back, yeah, straight out here and then that the hard right, right here, okay. Can we?
There's more down that way as well.
It's 22 back, can we be back, it's 32, does that work, folks?
No.
Yeah. Can that be work, folks?
Yes. Sorry.
Among, well, the educational principles, right, that sort of undergird what MVP's approach is, particularly in sessions, right? And so, jargon check. What MVP tries to use as its core education principles are engaging pedagogy. What is that? What are we talking about? We're talking about engaging pedagogy as an educational principle. Let me start with that second word, the P word.
Oh, I was gonna take a stab at the whole thing, but we can
Okay.
start with the.
Yeah, can you start with the P word?
With the P word, so pedagogy, there are faculty people in the room. I have a better answer for this than I would, but I think that means like that there is an intentionality about the way we approach our teaching or our facilitation.
Okay, thank you.
How is that?
That's pedagogy is just a style of teaching that you're using. So there's all kinds of pedagogy of teaching, direct instruction and active different types of, right? We wouldn't want to go into a session and have a 60-minute lecture, PowerPoint slide. And so you choose different pedagogy that stands on principles of.
How many of y'all have been in the audience for a 60-minute lecture or PowerPoint? So that's not a common thing, is it? Yeah. You want to take a crack at
It doesn't mean it's good.
the whole thing? What would you say?
I said, it may be common, but that doesn't mean it's good.
Yeah. Yeah. So what are we talking about? We talk about engaging.
I think engaging means both the teacher and the student. They're engaging in the learning and they're engaging in the process of wrestling with it. So in science, a specific term would be scientific inquiry pedagogy. Right, and you have all these different types of step-by-step procedures that are engaging and designed to have discussions and do group work and all of that.
Okay. Well, let's take a look at that. Can I have somebody sort of read off the bullet points for us? So we're all following along. You think about engaging pedagogists from an MPP perspective. The other kind,
You want to read it?
You want somebody to read it? Oh.
What is an engaging pedagogy? To facilitate an authentic learning experience that is, in part, driven by the learner. By challenging participants to own their learning, they become engaged in a way that maximizes retention and application of the material. It also becomes more valuable as information they want to learn more about. Discussion-based, inspires students' will to think and be self-actualized. Facilitators must be able to create a safe space in which all students feel comfortable and confident that their opinion is worthwhile.
So what parts of MVP as a curriculum already have you experienced as a facilitator or as a student in this way?
It's a lot of like engaging activities.
Okay.
Instead of like reading information. So you present something, but give the learners a chance to engage in it and speak their opinion on it.
Can you think specifically about what are some of the components?
Like the engage, the unsure, agree, disagree, one. There's the leadership one. There's generalize the empathy and maybe component. So there's like these little engaging activities that help them think about big ideas.
What are we talking about? What are we talking about when we talk about active learning? And by the way, these are threaded together, right?
The first thing that pops in my mind, I laugh at Donnie his story, is like they're engaging with the material. Saying engaging, but like my very first thought that pops in when I hear active learning is engaging with material, doing something with material, whether that's thinking about it, whether that's something hands-on, whatever it is, doing something, whether they're not just hearing it or just reading it. And those are components of doing something. I think it's much bigger.
And there's a piece of like self-reflection in that too. Like you're applying the material to who you are. It's not just like information.
Okay.
I think there's that unlearning component that goes on too, because when you engage different voices and different perspectives, all of a sudden you realize your own perspective is not the only perspective in the room.
I was gonna say, I think along those lines, you're sort of considering where it fits in your world, which means that you're changing your world a little bit too.
Can I ask a question? Because this, for me, that last bullet point is extremely difficult to do in 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this program is super engaging and active, and we're asking these kids to come in and right off the bat, here's an unsure, agree, disagree, and you've known me for 5 minutes, and let's have you be honest about what you think and feel in this place I've tried to make safe and comfortable in the 5 minutes that I've known you. I mean, it's an awesome program, and we were talking about her midterm, doing it in a whole semester, you could create that. So do you have any advice or suggestions on this? Because I think that one's a tough one to get to.
Yeah, so two pieces to that. Number one, hopefully some of the answer to that unpacks as we continue to move forward. I may ask you to think about sort of actively engaging how this is maybe working, right? Which is, again, I'm asking you to sort of be in it and sort of see it, certain perspective, because there are ways in which, I mean, you just described it a little bit, right? So you talked about, you know, you were disclosing some information in the space, right? From the very beginning about it. And I'd ask you to consider whether or not comfort and the feelings around safety and confidence, whether they exist on a continuum. Do they? Okay. So if we can accept that they exist on a continuum, as absolute as this statement, as this sentence may sound, is we'll ask you to appreciate, right, sort of safety or comfort along that sort of continuum. And in fact, during the course of any of our particular experiences in a space, it doesn't always often still travel in the same direction all the time. Does it? Sometimes it'll sort of jump back and sort of feel that. And so I'll ask you, so one of the answers to your question in the moment is take note of that. That's just a fact, right? So it's part of the appreciation of sort of what it means to be in the space. But this bullet point is more than anything is a way to reinforce and signal that as a facilitator, you are responsible for what happens in the room, right? And so taking on the responsibility of that this is a part of the principle of what we're trying to do. Yeah, and so we'll continue to sort of explore what that sort of means going forward. Yes, sir.
No, I just kind of wanted to add to her question is that, you know, as facilitators, I think we do create a safe space. It's just oftentimes the people we're engaging, whether they're students or whether it's faculty that we're engaging with, may not share at that moment. Kind of like when we're dealing with victims, a lot of times they're not ready to do or participate, but you're constantly creating that safe space where in the future they can say, you know what, I had that safe space at that moment, other people shared, you know, maybe next time I'll share if there's another opportunity, and you'll continue building on that way. But you're always creating that safe space as a facilitator, whether they share or not in that moment or not.
Yeah, thank you. We will take care we'll stop at some point, if it's not the end of the day today, tomorrow, just to highlight some of the pieces that help to sort of reinforce this. Again, I'll invite you and ask you to think about this particular bullet point from the perspective of, number one, we're responsible for what happens in space. Number two, that sort of safety and comfort exists on a continuum for any of us, right? And so it's sort of not the expectation that, you know, the most sort of open and I'm losing the vocabulary, but the most sort of open experience around safety that I could possibly experience is the one that you're responsible for. That's not what this is suggesting there. Does that make sense for folks? Does that begin to address what it was that you were asking about? Sort of?
Yeah, no, sorry, I keep adding to that. I mean, I have a bunch of, yeah, I just think it would be helpful to kind of go over and talk about ideas, but yeah, that's a great starting point.
Awesome, thank you. Okay.
I'm also finding myself thinking about that last bullet point, and I get the piece that we're responsible for what's happening in the room and for caring for all of these participants. But I keep wanting to insert and brave so that we're creating a space that is both safe and brave, because we are asking the students to do these things that we were talking about before the break that require courage and stepping out of what has been a comfortable perspective in one year.
Yeah. And so one of the ways to, and then we'll move forward to the next piece. So one of the ways to do that is in how you choose to set up the expectations for the space. So one of the things, oftentimes in a session around expectations, and it's like, so we're gonna have a conversation. Expect this. We're gonna respectfully challenge ourselves and each other's thinking. I'm gonna ask you, this could be hard for somebody, any of these could be hard for some folks. But operate in the gray. It can be any of these, but what do you think I mean by this? So here's an expectation. We're gonna ask you to operate in the gray. What do you think that means?
That reminds me, I think we use that phrase all the time when we do the agree, share, disagree exercise. Is that, it's not about right or wrong, it's just about sharing experience with others as a view.
Sure.
And appreciate.
Yeah, okay.
It's not dismissing the tension. It's allowing the tension to kind of percolate and just be in space. That's okay.
So what may be one way to describe what the tension is when we think about this idea? One of the tensions that you may think about.
Well, it's just like, I was probably thinking about the unsure, the disagree, agree, unsure kind of exercise. There can be tension in different places, and sometimes people want to mediate or explain it, sometimes it's okay, just don't let it be there, experience it.
For sure. So there's another, so that's a sort of direct nod towards us. So we would highlight the experience of agree, disagree. We're going to do this here in a few minutes, so we want to bury the lead. But is literally the experience, the functionality, and the experience of that particular exercise. Because what is it doing? What are we inviting people to do? And agree, disagree, unsure.
Disagree.
Okay. Sure. But before you even do that, what?
Share their thoughts.
Yeah,
be vulnerable. And be vulnerable. Look at that coin word over there.
Yeah, this is, shit, you're asking me what I think about this? Really? Oh, I get to say actually where I'm coming from around this? And beginning with you, Mr. Miss, them facilitator, you're not here to like sort of check me on my thinking in that way? Oh, okay. Oh, I don't like what they said, so I get to challenge that piece of it? Oh, wait a minute. For some people, that's signaling something about the space, right? That's creating that in and of itself is creating a sense of, wait a minute. Sort of I can say, and it immediately acknowledges or addresses one of the anxieties of folks that come into spaces like this, particularly folks, again, who are interested in the beginning about having a conversation from the standpoint of we're doing a violence prevention session, right? So the violence prevention people are here. We're going to have this discussion, right? And so what a lot of people have experienced and what they internalize is, you're going to jam some PC shit down my throat, and I'm not about that. And from the beginning, it's about eliciting perspectives and ideas of like, oh, I get to say is a way for certain people that are being invited into the space to feel safer about what it is that they think and about potentially sharing. And again, it's the opportunity to, as I mentioned earlier, this is not mutually exclusive to or an application of this, is it? Right? Because at the end of the day, we are in different ways, and we're going to go through some of these techniques. Are asking people to challenge their thinking. I see your hand in the back, but the other piece I want to flag in relation to the operating in the gray is the simple, and this is agree, disagree comes into this as well, but there are other aspects of the curriculum that do where we want to set this up as an expectation going forward is some people are sitting in space, it's like, tell me what the answer is. Tell me what's all this like discussion and this person and that person that makes some people be very uncomfortable, right? Around issues that are already can feel tense, right? And some anxiety about. And so setting up the expectation in the beginning to let people know it's like, hey, we're gonna ask you to, for some folks, it's gotta be black and white. Give me the answer versus not. We're not gonna be in that space here. We're gonna ask you to do something else, right? And so please accept that invitation and potentially that challenge as well.
How do you manage, like, I think someone else had a question.
They did. I'm gonna a question or comment, and then I'm gonna move us back to.
You were saying about how to tell people that it's okay. Yes, I want your opinion and everything like that. But I think the converse is true too. Is like it's okay to not like that opinion. It's okay, and you're going to feel internal conflict. Like should I say something or not something? And give people to often give permission to get comfortable with conflict. Conflict is not a bad thing.
Yeah.
So we only learn and grow from conflict.
Thank you. So the piece about sort of we're responsible for what happens in the room is a sort of direct example of that. So by virtue of the way that we've set up, so the parameters of this particular exercise, and you understand what the goals are, you understand the structure of how to manage it, right? Is one piece, and then within that is both the invitation to we're going to challenge, but then the people are going to look to, and it's on us to make sure. Right? That these two things go together. So it's okay. Okay, so we're in here, we're sort of challenging each other, and believe me, this works well with peer groups, especially. There's often already an internal sort of gauge, sort of within them, where they know where they're crossing lines or not, certainly, and it may feel different for us to be outside, but it's ultimately up to us to be able to say, okay, well, okay. So time out. Right, we're gonna keep this piece of it respectful. It's like we're looking for this, but we're looking for this within there's certain character to how we will accept how we challenge each other in the space. So that's an example of we're responsible for what happens as a way of continuing to push down the continuum, if you will. Okay. So. Getting a chance to see Spider-Man. How about here? Whoops. Sorry, I skipped that. We'll go back to that one. Active learning. Somebody help us out? Can you read it for us?
What is active learning? Participant learning needs are at center, an approach where students engage the materials of reading, writing, talking, listening, and reflecting. Basic elements of active learning: talking and listening, writing, reading, reflecting. Passive learning: traditional approach, lecture, instructor-centered, didactic, and key components of engaging pedagogies involve the strong presence of active learning strategy.
So does that track as we continue to sort of talk about what basic core principles are around education? Because the last piece of this is around being learner-centered. The term showed up in the last slide. When you think about being learner-centered, somebody read that for us.
What is a learner-centered approach? Engaging pedagogies are learner-centered, not teacher-facilitator-centered. This means we will be focused on the experience and takeaway of the participants, not on how smart we are as facilitators.
So does that, I just heard some smiling, some laughter related to that. So what's the experience like for us who've had that? I already asked, everybody sat through a 60-minute or whatever PowerPoint presentation that was didactic, one direction from the front to you. Or somebody I worked with years ago used to talk about when we go through sort of check for this, as we're looking through an agenda, how much of it is that? It's like sit and give. Like, there's too much sit and get at this point. We need to break this up, easy, right? As a nod towards engaging pedagogy. Well, what's that experience like? You say you hate it?
Painful.
Painful? Okay.
Easy. It's easy. Some of my students constantly say, quit making us be active learners. Sometimes I just want you to lecture to me. Just give me a quiz.
Yeah. Right.
It tends to be more passive, which I think relates back to how we don't want people to be. So when you're lecturing, it is very easy for people to become passive recipients of information.
And what's, oh, go ahead.
I think it also turns into what we want you to know versus what we want to know. Especially when like a professor reads a class and they're just lecturing at you. There's no gray area. There's no opportunity for the student to invest in that information. And so a more active approach allows for a student to take interest and take initiative.
Yeah. Critical thinking happens.
Right.
There is no critical thinking. You're just taking it in and then regurgitating it to you later. Well,
What's important about those pieces for these conversations around this work and these issues?
That's for behavior change.
Okay.
That's what got us in this mess in the first place.
Can you say more about that?
But, I mean, we're products of our environment. We've been regurgitating what what our parents taught us, or what our the media taught us, or what society has taught us, and we're just spitting it back out. Like, that's what got us in the first place. We're not questioning it, making it our own.
Mm-hmm.
Just listening and repeating.
Yeah, attitude and behavioral change, right? The tools for doing any of that. In some ways where we started, right? Is the learning, the unlearning, and the being open to, and the willing to be vulnerable, and the willing to have courage in this, of those pieces. So much of what we just described is backed up, right? This isn't just an experience that we've had to run an MVP from the beginning. This is about what it is that we know. Quite ironically, when you think about the way a lot of higher learning institutions do their teaching, in terms of what we know about, or certainly certain corners of it or pockets of it. But this is what we know about what people learn, what people retain. It's like how it is, and we want to be as a. So we were employed. So such a simple creature. This is where we want to be, right? And this is where, for the most part, sort of we are, sort of programmatically. But everything you just described about with the sort of positive aspects of it, what we get out of this, both from the experience of a participant, but also what it is that they take away, sort of is embedded in sort of just basic educational principles. I love it, that's the thing. Right? And so this part reinforces what it is that we've been describing. The idea that the best answers, if you will, the resolution, comes from the space. We're not giving it to them, right? No one is presenting, right? And this is a little tease in terms of the parts we're going to ask you to think about and discuss going forward around implications on the campus, et cetera. So there's nothing about, I'm going to invite so-and-so to campus or to class or to talk to my team. And we're going to call that education. Not that it can't be a part of it, right? But we're going to call that good. We're going to call that good. If somebody's going to give a speech to the group, and they're going to sit and listen to the speech. And this is behavior change. This is attitude change, right? Like wanting to lean in and be reinforced by the strongest elements of what we understand will support people's ability to grow. And some of these key pieces we'll get into going forward they're really around facilitation, that it's so much about inquiry, right? Where we are, if any, artists of anything or scientists of anything, it's the art and science of inquiry as a means of engaging people. Okay, so any questions about any of this kind of thing? We want a parking lot other than what we've already identified in relation to this. Okay. We're going to come back to this tomorrow, sort of right before we start assigning you facilitation exercises, getting into a little bit about some of these key other sort of elements of our educational philosophy. This is really sort of boiling down some of what, not necessarily just the sort of high theory, if you will, but what is it that we're trying to do that's embedded in the elements of the curriculum? And some of it we've already talked about, right? We've done and talked about reframing the conversation. This is one way in which we're describing reframing the conversation about masculinity and issues around gender roles and masculinity, but reframing the conversation in and of itself, I'm just gonna put my hand over the part past the cold, right, is a core principle. Like, this is what we're talking about when we talk about leadership. This is what we're talking about when we're talking about looking after one another, brother's keeper. Right? This is what we're talking about when we're talking about how we show up as bystanders to one another. Right? Some of it is just a sort of frame, right, in the clearest and simplest terms, in terms of what it is what we're talking about. We're asking you to think about the type of person you want to be, the type of friend you want to be, the type of colleague you want to be, the type of family member it is that you want to be. We're asking you to think about this stuff from a personal and professional perspective, right? That's part of the framing and the reframing that we're consistently doing throughout, right? And again, toward your perspective around the question around safe space. So there are so many different touch points. One of them is that's embedded in part of the curriculum when we're asking people to split up. But gender is another way in which we are moving along the continuum of giving people the opportunity to feel invited, to feel safer and more open about what it is that they're willing to express. Okay. Now, you. Have you seen this? We'll get a chance to look at this. Hopefully, a lot later on today than in the morning. Let's get up. And we'll do well, that. So, we're going to do this agree, disagree, and share elements. We're going to use this side as agree. We're going to use sort of the barrier space, if you will, as disagree. And unsure, we're going to be in the back middle here. So we make a little bit of a skinny triangle, so we've got lines of sort of sight and communication around it. So, and this is the statement. If a friend or colleague is abusive in their relationship or being abused, I need to do something about it. If a friend or colleague is abusive in their relationship or being abused, I need to do something about it. I agree. I disagree. I'm unsure. If you're unsure, back middle, please. So, move it.
Okay. Hopefully, like that person belonging circumstance.
Okay, let's start with this thing.
Oh,
yeah.
Did we steal it?
So let's start with the agree side. Somebody that agrees, please tell us. Please tell the rest of the group why you agree with the statement.
I think for me, the mind your own business impulse is strong, especially if there's been, that person is not wanting any sort of approach, but I think even doing something is still talking to the person, acknowledging the difficulty or whatever, like difficult thing is happening, whatever abusive behavior is happening. I think that's still doing something and working with them to figure out how to do it. So I like that it's open-ended as far as not defining what doing something is.
Okay. Well, why do you agree with the statement though?
I think there's just like I think there's like a good way to live, or like a positive way to live, and I think an abusive relationship is probably not that. And I guess just a human thing. If we talk about leadership, I think supporting one another and being there for one another is a part of that. So, yeah, I think that's a human element, or I think of humans at their best is addressing stuff like that.
I think this kind of builds into like what my personal definition of a responsibility of a friend is. Like, to me, I'm someone who looks out for my friends and like just checks in if something seems questionable. And I agree with the like ambiguity of doing something. Because it could just be like, hey, are you okay? Like, are you having a good experience in this relationship? Or it could be intermediate. But I think the gray area there, and with my values, I have to agree with this.
Okay. So we talk about with your values. So where does it come from for you?
It comes a lot from how I was raised. My parents really wanted me to be someone who people trusted and people could rely on. And part of how I've worked with that is someone my friends can trust and rely on, and they want to feel safe, and I want to make sure they can.
A couple more. Actually, where's my line? Where's my unsure line? No, I'm just asking where it goes.
Unsure.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Just like indecision is a decision, doing nothing is doing something. So, like, I think, just as the colleagues have said, you know, just to say, I'm here for you. You're not perhaps doing actively anything, but you are doing something.
Okay. So why do you agree? Why is it important for you?
For me, I'm not good at passivity. That just would not sit well with me.
I think part of it too, like, there's so much that you can read into this, and so like, I was debating between the agree and the unsure, and so I think there's like what they talked about, like the need to do, like it's not like you actually have to step in and do, you know, like saying like, hey, is everything okay, it's still doing something. But then I also look at the first part before the comma, if I actually saw that, if I saw someone being abusive to someone else, I would feel that it was my responsibility to step in and say something.
What?
I just think, I mean, past experiences that I've had, that people around me have had, I think that oftentimes, and just working with people that are in abusive relationships, I debate on this one, and I'm kind of looking at some of my counselor colleagues on this. I debate on this one because I realize that sometimes stepping in can make things worse for victims, and so that's where I debated between the unsure step of it. But I also look at, you know, if I'm walking across campus, for example, and I see someone else, you know, hit someone in the face, as a person that works on campus, I feel like it's my responsibility, you know, fighting's not allowed on campus, it's policy and procedure, like to go over and say something that, and it's more than just policy and procedure. For me, I think too, if it was me, if Kenlin saw someone hit me, I would want someone to potentially step in and help me.
I think too, I look at like a value of mine is having deep, close relationships with people. And I think that whether you are being abusive, like something's going on with you, and then if you are being abusive, like knowing how much that hurts people who are victims, like I would never want
a friend, if that's going on, like there's a closeness in asking about that and connecting with someone in that and being there for someone. If you disregard it, I feel like that is a real reflection of like your relationship with them too, if that makes sense. Like then your relationship's probably not as close or connected as you might want it to be. So I don't know, I think that value of close connections with people plays into this for me. Like how I want to be there for people and check in.
Thank you. Anytime. Let's, by the way, as you know, you can move at any point during the course of this above. Let's disagree. Let's cheer for the rest of the group while you disagree with this.
Well, I would be more in the center, I think, just because I can see, it's all contextual too, a lot of it, because I can see it from many different perspectives. And I know that well, no, I don't even agree with myself sometimes. The way that was written.
That's a t-shirt.
I mean, the way that was written, can I really fix somebody else's problems? You know, I need that word, that little phrase right there really makes me step back a little bit, because it, you know, the people that are in that relationship, I'm certain probably realize that there is a problem, and I can't really fix that. So do you get, I don't know, that makes sense.
And I was, and that, you said it very well, thank you. I was going back and forth, and I don't know if anybody noticed. I was here, I was there, then I backed up again, I went there, and I was here. Right? And it really is, I think, the question, if a friend or a colleague is abusive in their, is abusive in their relationship or being abused, I need to do something about it. The reason I'm on this side is that I would have to think about it first, not jump into it, not knowing all of it, and then maybe I would be able to go into another side. But at the beginning, I'm going to be on this side because I don't know everything. And I can't fix it anyway because it's between two other people.
Well, I'll go, I guess. I'm here because in all of my Sarah training, the hardest thing that came out was that I am not supposed to jump in and rescue, that there's a lot of decisions that need to happen from the person being abused or abusing. So, I mean, I totally resonate with what you're saying because I feel like I would offer, here's Ellie's number, and here is Sarah. You know, I would offer some resources to those people, but and honestly, that's the hardest thing because I'm kind of that want to jump in and rescue and like fix it. And like the fixer, I have to step back. I mean, I want to offer as many support and let that person know that there is support and there is help and I would help take them to Ellie's office and whatever. But I think that this is really hard because if you're in an abusive relationship, at the end of the day, it's your decision to stay or to go. And so, I mean, all we can really do is provide those sources and hopefully they can happen.
I think I'm really vacillated between these two, still am, but because I do feel like I need to do something about it, and I think that is vague enough to sort of think about the something as a large continuum of things, whether that's giving resources or even working on like culture change in some way. But I think the spirit of the question feels a little bit more like do something, and I can see scenarios with a colleague who is abusive in a relationship that I don't know the other party at all, or there are suspicions of that, where I feel like there might be real questions in terms of my ability to actually do something, or the appropriateness given the potential for what I heard someone over here, Mindy, say, in terms of the doing something, making it potentially worse as opposed to better. So most of me wants to be over there, but they're just like, I appreciate the nuance even within this that makes me stay here.
Yeah,
Last one
so the friend or colleague piece, so I think if it was just, if a friend, yeah, that would feel much easier. So I think about my colleagues and, you know, so is the colleague somebody who reports to me? Is the colleague, you know, the person to whom I report? What is the nature of that relationship? What are the other power dynamics that are at play there? It puts a whole other really potentially complicating piece into the mix. That makes me not clear, yeah, how might I respond based on who it is and what that relationship is.
Thank you. So there were a few of these. There are responses to this, but I want to come back to this. Like I said, from the beginning, a few of you addressed the whole notion of what this means, but I want to come back to this. Now we've been back through a year. What does it mean to do something? To do something, and why might this be an important question to answer? Yeah.
For me, it'd be easier to be on the agree side if it actually ended with I need to do something. It's the phrase about it that inserts me into a place where I'm not sure it's my business yet. That doesn't mean I wouldn't, but this goes back to that I kind of want more information. So what does it mean to do something, I think opens up this question as opposed to about it, which for me can move into policing. And my concern always in the training that I do and the teaching that I do is that, and this is where students get concerned, is that am I going to have to police everybody else's behavior from a different perspective? So that's why I like where you left it there. What does it mean to do something versus something about it? Because about it for me becomes I'm supposed to go in, and this was the fixing incident. So that I just appreciate now that you're just saying, what's it mean to do something?
Okay.
Because the checking in for me would also be maybe paying attention to what the signs are. So there would be doing something could be paying more attention to a situation. If I see somebody hit on campus, that's a whole different realm. Many of these things are much more vague and much more hard to read. If I think my colleague is abusive in the relationship, it's not probably because they told me that. So I would probably pay attention more if we might do something.
What?
To how my friend or colleague is behaving, to language, language usage, behavior and language.
Yeah. Okay.
I could also see
Some
paying
other-
attention to like opportunities because I think for me some of the immobilizing part of the do something is this might not be the right venue, but if I'm paying attention, I may also be looking for the actual invitation or opportunity.
For some others, go ahead. It's still an open question. What does it mean to do something?
I think it's be just moving in closer proximity to my friend or my colleague, just being in a relationship with them.
And creating opportunity for that.
Okay.
It may not be even addressing something correctly, but if you choose to draw nearer.
In a lot of ways, like more information is really good. But then in a lot of ways, I think that can also be paralyzing, like how much information do you need to do something? And I think, I don't know, I mean, it's like, part of me is like, yeah, information's good, I wanna get more information, but there's a piece of courage that is never gonna maybe come with more information, a piece of like your value that no matter how much information you get, it's just not gonna make you act. You can still stay passive with a whole bunch of information. So I think doing something, it can look like just like actively doing something. I don't know.
I think doing something too, like looking for more opportunities, paying more attention, even ourselves doing more research on what we are saying, it's like we can, okay, what does this mean? What are the possibilities of this? For people, like, I realize a lot of us in the room have some knowledge about this area, and that's why we're here. But in my thinking, teaching this to new people that maybe don't even have the basic information that we in this room have, for them even just gaining, not even the information maybe specifically about that person, but generally speaking, like, I think this might be abusive, but I don't even know if it's abusive or not. What exactly does that look like? Like, instead, we may be more aware of that in this room right now.
I think you're kind of getting towards all of the things we talked in our presentations about too. But the direct approach, the indirect approach, protocol, allies. I feel like there's follow up. Yes. So I think those are in there too if you want to do something more targeted. You can simply go up to your colleague or friend. That's kind of the check-in. The direct approach.
Well,
I don't know what's going on, but maybe it's something and I'm here if you need me,
Yeah. What are some things? I'll come back to this piece of it in a second. But let me ask you this way. Is there, within your workspace, are there protocols, things that you are directed, obligated to do, or that you're suggested to do in relation to a situation like this? How many of y'all have policies that you're aware of that give you either direction or dictates? How many of y'all have policies in your workspace?
It depends. It entirely.
If it's a student, we do.
Yes, friend, colleague, no. Right, or like situation involving two employees, yes, but like employee and.
Okay.
Right.
So for many of you, no, it's just about student. For those of you that do.
Title IX, yes, but physical abuse, no.
It would cover that as well. I mean, the training that we've had at Mercy College says if a colleague reports or shows signs of, there's a full process for that, and it needs to be reported immediately. And that we have a responsibility to. I mean, we did a check-in, like even during the training that was, do you feel it is your responsibility to report these kinds of things? And there was like, because no one wanted to claim it. Of course, then the lawyer's in front and says, yes, you do need to report it. I mean, it was a matter of, it's not a question. But I don't think, again, that's the difference in the training styles and the expectations.
Or the lack of good policies.
Right. But I mean, from that though, what we derived, and I think even has helped us in acknowledging what kind of training our institution needs, is helping them understand that our policies, it's easy to talk about what we're going to do for students. It's easy to talk about what we would do in this scenario if a student did this. We rarely press that topic of what about the colleague aspect.
Right.
And because of that, I think she was setting that expectation of it covered both sides. Now, when it comes to a friend, I don't know where the accountability, I mean, other than your own moral compass, I don't know that any policy is going to cover a friend outside the institution.
Yeah. So I want to come back over because there are other threads related to this that we can sort of go down, but I want to sort of pause this here so we can transition out, because I think sort of this last piece, right, is very much going to become sort of a part of opening up in the same, so you just flagged, think back up, you talked about, well, yeah, so this is starting to feel like that options conversation, right, that we have there, where we're starting to give people a framework or an outline to think about what their options are versus what we sometimes describe as the fight or flight, right? So if we get people off the dime of thinking that doing something means the hardest damn thing that I can think about doing in the moment, the most emotionally hard thing, the most intrusive thing, the most dangerous thing is my do something option, And then my other option is to do nothing, to be paralyzed, et cetera, with the paralysis of analysis or paralysis of whatever, right? It's like part of it is to disabuse people of that sensibility around it. So the question becomes, so what's different about that here, right? This is what we're trying to encourage people to do. And the last thread of this conversation, I would ask you, because the last bullet point here is become a teacher. Learn more, become a teacher, become an advocate. Did you just not identify, for some of you, a hole in your space, your workspace, your organization in terms of resources for any individual around potentially addressing this? Is that doing something? Is that doing something about it, right? Because I want to get back to this again, because sometimes the paralysis of analysis of about it, this is it. It's like, this is the it. Okay. So does that change any of the implications of opening this up beyond fight or flight, right? Continuing to examine or focus on all of the things that you might do that aren't going to work, or that might be intrusive, whatever, which can be important to sort of understand, but as a means of sort of eliminating those things in order to think about the things that you can do, right? So this is in some way stepping back out of the exercise here for a little, because I would never necessarily suggest that in the way that I'm doing now, that what we're trying, that this is directly, in this exercise, that this is directly connected to what we do in these scenarios, which is there are no wrong answers for options from our perspective, other than doing nothing. That is the one we're trying to get people to, not dictate to them that that's the wrong answer, but get them to come to that place, right? And a way to begin to do that, to answer the why for them during the course of early on, sort of in the session, is begin to sort of open up folks' imagination. What I wrote down here in green is, what does it mean to do something? What are some factors here, right? What does it mean to do something? This came up. Well, approach matters in terms of whether or not I feel comfortable about doing something. Like literally, what's the tactic? The other thing that's important about that is the tone and character of the tactic. So literally the same thing that one person might do might be less effective depending on the character or the tone of what their approach is. And then the other piece of it, and there could be others, is the timing, right? So again, the paralysis analysis of, well, what I filter this challenge for me is, it means doing something, that hard thing, and it means doing it right now. And neither one of those things is going to be effective. They may be intrusive, they may be dangerous, et cetera, therefore nothing. When in fact, what we're inviting you to do is open up the opportunity to think about, when can it be? And if we can call the process of developing policies within our organizations as a means of changing the culture and the dynamic within that organization, as a means of addressing how abuse is treated within that organization, right? That sends messages to everybody within it, myself, either one of those people, everybody else. Is that a means of, at the end of the day, doing something about what it is that we understand and appreciate as abuse happening amongst people within our service, that we are bystanders to, and that we understand are experiencing as victims or as perpetrators? Does that make sense? I saw, was there, somebody went in over here, or is it just that some of the not? Okay. Okay. Because this is a really important piece of, as you think about how we develop personally, in terms of how we're facilitators of this work. This is, we are trying to invite people to open up their imaginations, right? In terms of what it means to be active engaged and empowered around this, right? Giving them an opportunity to fulfill something that we always start with that relates to, in so many ways, who is it that I want to be? What type of environment do I want to live in? Do I want to work in? What type of support do I want as a person to be all I can be? In the Army or not? Right? To sort of continue to sort of let the tumblers fall in the lock. Because one of the things I didn't mention specifically early on, and this is a challenge, it shows up for all of us. Well, I did when I asked you to sort of finish this sentence for me. So that's not as literal as to say what happens in this house stays in this house is the version of what passivity means. Right, there are narratives that we sort of create for ourselves that are ninja-like for many of us. They got all the moves, right? As much as we feel like we're down for the cause, some of us, most all of us have within us, and I don't count myself as any different, that ninja inside that's got all the answers, right? All the key questions that are going to keep me locked in exactly where it is that I am. Not doing anything. Because we know the sort of the kick out question related to this particular statement, as you all know, is the somewhat rhetorical again. You are a bystander to this particular dynamic. A friend or colleague is abusive in their relationships or being abused. And you choose to say or do nothing ever in relation to this. What message does that potentially send to your friend or colleague who's abusive?
It's okay.
They don't matter. They don't matter. Others don't care.
Others don't care?
If they're alone in it.
As an abuser?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Both, I think.
Yeah. How about a potential message to a victim of abuse if ultimately you know about this and nobody ever says or does anything in relation to it?
That's what you asked first. That was my answer to that one.
Yeah.
But they don't matter, that nobody else cares, that nobody's there to help. We're stuck in it, what's happening is okay, what's happening is their fault, they deserve it. I'll stop. Please.
I went through one of the projects that I was responsible for in the state when I was in the governor's office of the state. We did a project or policy around an executive order. That I drafted an executive order, or with a lot of help from different people. The governor signed. We mandated every state agency, 19,000 plus employees, to come up with a policy related to sexual and domestic violence in the workplace policy that was developed by each agency, specific to and tailored to the operational sort of dynamics and the tempos and the size of that agency, right? And everyone was trained at least in a 2-hour session sort of related to that. And it was developed from within, right? And one of the things, after a year and a half of this entire process, we had a luncheon at the governor's mansion. There was this luncheon piece, and we invited folks from these different agencies, different ones, to come in and just talk about what the experience was like. And it continues to be, to this day, one of the most powerful, moving experiences I've ever had professionally, period. And it melded sort of what I did professionally for 15 years and then 20 years almost in what I do now. And so much of what was powerful about that was the effect that simply having that process take place within their workspace said and did to, and there were mostly women in the space who had been victims specifically of abuse in their relationship, about a new dawn in terms of what they experienced in their work. Suddenly it became clear to them, they felt like, oh, this place that I work understands something about what my experience is and has been, right? In not a superficial way, in a fundamental way. It changed my experience going to work, being in this space, being around the people that I was working in. That was the impact of what it was. And it was a fact that some of them were experiencing at the time in the space what was going on there. but it didn't necessarily represent any one person, like engaging them specifically on what was happening with them, right? Does that make sense? Again, I share this piece as a means of just sort of sharing what it can be to open up our imagination about this.
It's like kind of understanding there's unintentional things that happen for people when you choose to not be passive. Like even if it's not for the specific person that you're trying to help or something.
Yeah. We've heard it from this side, right?
Yeah.
This is another reframe, right? From this side, we've heard it in different ways. You never know who's watching. You never know, right? Look at all the head nods. It's like, you don't get that. It's sort of taking what it was that we're supposed to sort of be embedded in this lesson from sort of this high and applying it to this space and this place and these issues that are hard. Full stop, isn't it? Okay, let's come back to our seats. And the time. Okay. So, let's count off by 10, please. 3, 4, 5, 6,
7, 8,
9,
10, 11.
Somebody's always messing up the Sesame Street. 1,
2, 3, 4, 5, 6,
7,
8,
9, 10.
1.
Right on.
She wasn't sitting here with you, Captain.
Awesome. 1s get together. 2s, 3s, 4s, get together with your counterpart, please. Count your parts.
1,
4, 5,
I got any 1s?
7,
9. Back there, I'm not sure.
Yeah, everybody gets 1. There we go.
Thank you, Ken.
So you have just one paper? That's
less than
Yeah, you do. Everybody has a marker. Everybody has a sheet of paper, please, and everybody has a marker. Here.
Thank you.
You're just better. Yeah, there's a couple back there. You can grab a couple markers back there. You need a marker? Yeah. That's all right. Each group just needs 1 marker. Who does not have a marker? No, actually, fat tip markers, the Sharpies are not going to work. So I think we've got enough of these, but they've got to be the fat tips. Fat tips.
That's what we gotta do. That's what we'll do.
Sorry about that.
You can even use this lovely easel.
That's what it is. So we're going to do all at the same time, abuse and respect. We're going to fill these out, right? The main point of this is going to be our conversation around the debrief a little bit, but going to still sort of walk through to fill out these categories yourself. So as you know, We're gonna create a list of abusive, well, actually, let me be specific about this first. So groups 1 through 5, raise your hand, please. Groups 1 through 5, gonna ask you all to construct a list of abusive behaviors in the context of a relationship, right? Specific abusive behaviors. So group 1, verbal. This is my group 1. Group 2, emotional. Group 3, where are we at? Technological. Group 4, physical. Group 5, sexual, right? So let's start us off. Group 1, anybody in the larger group, give me a type of abusive behavior in the context of a relationship that's verbal. So an example.
Name calling.
Name calling. There's one. Give me another one, please.
How many people are stupid?
Okay. Calling somebody that they're stupid. So please put your category across the top. Please. You just put emotional, physical, whatever, but just make sure you put your category across the top. Right? How about emotional abuse? An example of emotional abuse in the context of a relationship. Okay, so manipulation, so we listed manipulation as what are some manipulative behaviors specifically? Anybody?
Controlling what you wear.
Okay.
Money.
Dictating what somebody wears.
Finances.
Finances is a noun.
Making them responsible for your own well-being.
Okay. So how,
Blame.
So saying if you,
blaming?
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So 2 pieces around that. Number 1, like snarky, we're looking for behaviors. All right, so that's one of the things. Please make sure what you're listing is a behavior, not necessarily a thing or an impact necessarily. Or a, I can't think of the other one, but just behaviors. And then the others is, what we're asking for is, and this is for every group, no points for consolidation. We're not trying to fit as many behaviors as we can into one term. We're trying to delineate as many behaviors as you can identify as possible. So 1 through 5, I want your abuse categories. 6 through 10.
That's the verb.
Your types of respect, right? And so the 2 rules related to this. Number 1, or the 1 ironclad rule related to this is what? In terms of types of respect. What are we looking for? Well, yeah, so the 2 behaviors. Yeah, so there are 3 behaviors, right? Not nouns or impacts necessarily, and as many behaviors as possible, right? So be as specific. And then the last rule is that it's got to be an affirmative behavior, right? So in other words, we're not allowing don't do. The classic example is don't rape is not a sign of respect, not one that we're going to accept in the context of a relationship, right? This is not about what you don't do. We want lists of behaviors that you do. All right? So go ahead, everybody, to their task. We're going to take a few minutes to finish this. Do your best. Oh, so, yeah, sorry, to be clear. So, group 6, verbal. Group 7, emotional. Group 8, technological. Group 9, physical. Group 10, sexual. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna feel it out. I'm gonna give you a few minutes to walk around and see how they're doing and feel it out. It's maybe probably good to bring on just 12:05, 12:10, 1:10 will just be done. Rather than 12:05, it looks like that's what we would do. Does that work? Do you have any
I think,
So, yes, sir. We definitely need these for
It also has to be closer to
There's some where
Okay, take one more minute, please. One more minute. Makes it this. Okay, go ahead and finish up whatever it is that you were writing aloud.
Respect.
Okay, no.
I think he's going under the copy. Okay. So here's what we're gonna do. We are going to. I don't know, it's exciting. Let me respect this word. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna hold form. We're gonna break for lunch now, right? So we'll break for lunch and come back and debrief this piece when we come back for lunch. So we're starting, it's 11:50 now. We're gonna ask folks to please be back by 12:50 so we can pick it up. We can do as well as we can in terms of what it is that we have left. I don't know if there's an announcement related to Rebecca or Michael in terms of, other than I know we're on our own.
If people need lunch directions, like restaurants and places.
Yeah.
Yeah. Here's 14th Street, that way's north, that way's south. Fast food is down this way, so.
South and north.
North would be like Subway, McDonald's, Taco Bell, Kentucky Fried, Taco John's down that way. There's also on 14th, there's a nice restaurant. What's that? Pueblo Viejo. They have, there's also some good taco trucks right there. Down this way, Robbie's the expert in taco trucks. Down this way, there's not as much. There's a great Thai place, Thai flavors. Down.
Just north of the freeway.
Yeah. And then like downtown is across the freeway.
That
There's
might-
a lot of options.
There's a good Chinese restaurant down there too called.
But a tasty taco.
It sounds too far.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right? You know, I've never been to Tasty Taco.
Do they train it all, or are they did not tell you to pop it?
No, I
You were
was
hoping
upset.
for that.
I was like, come on, can we just like slice it and push it out?
Yeah.
She laughed at me.
Would you like us to lock it?
Or, I mean, leave it open, but. I didn't.
We will, we'll lock this room, and then if you need access, you can give me your name, but probably the person at the front desk here can give you access if you need it. We'll lock the room.
I'm gonna run out, let's grab us out.
There's another one too that's just